Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was a hybrid who could kill originals and fell in love with Rebekah Mikaelson? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Fox in the French Quarter. The humidity of New Orleans was a living thing. It clung to brick, to skin, to the very air in your lungs, thick with the smell of stale beer, old river water, and something sweeter. Something that prickled the back of the throat. Magic, old and deep. Naruto Uzumaki had been in this city for a week, and he still wasn't used to the noise. It was a different kind of noise than he was used to. Not the clash of steel or the roar of a bayou, but a constant, pounding wave of life. Jazz, blues, and the off-key laughter of tourists spilled from every doorway on Bourbon Street. He stood at the velvet rope of Le Fantôme Bleu, a high-end jazz club tucked just far enough off the main drag to be exclusive. His arms were crossed over his chest, his simple black hen lay straining against a physique that was more wiry strength than bulky muscle. He wore the club's black blazer, but it felt like a costume. His bright, unruly blonde hair was a beacon under the gaslight, and his blue eyes, preternaturally clear, missed nothing. He was the new bouncer. It was a good job for an observer. From this post, he'd learned the city's hierarchy in 3 days. The humans were the cattle, blissfully unaware. The witches were the insulation, hiding in the walls, their power smelling of ozone and herbs. The vampires were the predators. They owned the night, and they moved with the casual, arrogant grace of creatures who hadn't been challenged in centuries. This club was their territory. His boss, a human named Jean-Paul, had a special arrangement with the city's self-proclaimed king. A vampire named Marcel. Slow night. Naruto turned his head. Camille, the bartender, was leaning against the doorframe, wiping a glass. She was one of the few humans who seemed to see the city for what it was, her eyes carrying a weary intelligence. "It's about to pick up," Naruto said. His voice was a low, smooth baritone, carrying a calm that seemed at odds with the chaotic energy of the quarter. "You always know, don't you?" She smiled. "It's like you can smell 'em coming." He just gave her a small, tight-lipped smile. Smell was the right word. The older a vampire was, the more complex their scent, a mix of dust, dried blood, and the faintest trace of the magic that kept them animated. He could smell 3 of them now, moving through the crowd, parting it without a touch. A moment later, they appeared, a trio of young, beautiful people, all dressed in designer clothes that looked painfully expensive. 2 men and a woman. They walked with that signature vampiric arrogance, their eyes sweeping the line of hopeful tourists with unconcealed disdain. "Right," the woman said, her voice a crisp, British-tinged command. She had blonde hair, but it was a pale, aristocratic blonde, worlds away from his own sun-kissed spikes. Her face was a perfect, delicate heart shape, and her eyes were a piercing, intelligent blue. She was, he recognized instantly, a walking, talking masterpiece of controlled danger. She didn't even look at Naruto. She just moved to unclip the velvet rope. Naruto's hand shot out, not touching her, but resting on the rope, barring her way. The entire street seemed to fall silent. The woman's 2 friends froze, their smiles turning into identical, reptilian sneers. The woman herself, however, just looked at his hand. Then, very slowly, she raised her eyes to meet his. Her head tilted, like a bird of prey studying a new and interesting puzzle. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dropping all pretense of politeness. "There's a line," Naruto said, his voice perfectly even, "and a cover charge." One of her companions, a dark-haired man with a cruel mouth, laughed. It was a short, sharp bark. "You're kidding. Do you have any idea who this is?" "Doesn't matter," Naruto replied, his eyes never leaving the woman's. Rules are rules. This was it, the moment of truth. He'd felt these creatures, mental probes before. The local vampires used it like a club, a blunt instrument to get free drinks or a warm meal. This one, he sensed, would be different. She stepped closer, invading his personal space. The scent of her was overwhelming, ancient, like a sealed tomb, but undercut with something floral. Chanel, maybe. She was impossibly beautiful, and she was using it as a weapon. Her pupils dilated. She locked her gaze with his. "You're going to unclip this rope," she commanded, her voice a silken, compelling whisper. "You're going to apologize for the inconvenience, and then you're going to go inside and forget you ever saw us." Naruto felt the compulsion hit his mind. It wasn't a whisper, it was a shove. 1,000 years of psychic dominance, a will forged in blood and fire, slammed against his consciousness, demanding obedience. And Naruto just held it. His mind, forged in battles against telepathic ninja, mind-walking demons, and the crushing weight of a tailed beast's hatred, was a fortress. Her compulsion was a strong wind against a mountain. He didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He just let her push, and he pushed back, not with aggression, but with simple, unadulterated presence. He saw the flicker in her eyes. First, confusion. Then, a flash of genuine, bone-deep shock. This wasn't immunity, like vervain. This was resistance. This was an immovable object meeting her unstoppable force. She pushed harder. He felt a bead of sweat trace her hairline. He gave her a small, almost sympathetic smile. "You should ask nicely." Rebekah Mikaelson, original vampire, sister to the most feared creature on Earth, took an involuntary step back. The shock on her face was so profound it was almost comical. Her companions looked baffled, their expressions flickering between anger and confusion. "Becca," the cruel-mouthed one whispered. Unnerved, Rebekah's shock hardened, in a split second, into something else. Not anger, not fear, intrigue. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her perfect face. The kind of smile that promised worlds of trouble. She had been bored for 300 years, and in the span of 10 seconds, this unknown, sun-kissed bouncer had just made her night. She tossed her pale blonde hair. "All right," she said, her voice light and playful, all trace of compulsion gone. She pulled a $100 bill from her clutch, a single, crisp note, and tucked it into the pocket of his blazer. "May we come in, please?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with a challenge he hadn't seen yet. Naruto's own lips twitched. He unclipped the rope. "Welcome to La Phantom Blue." She walked past him, her shoulder brushing his arm. He felt a jolt, like static electricity, where they touched. She didn't look back, but he knew he was the only thing in the city she was thinking about. Her two companions glared at him as they passed. The dark-haired one, Thierry, he knew from Marcel's crew, paused. "You're new," Thierry hissed, his voice low. "You just made a very, very big mistake." That was Rebekah Mikaelson. "She paid the cover," Naruto said, clipping the rope back in place. Thierry's eyes narrowed. "Marcel will hear about this. I look forward to it." Thierry scoffed and stalked into the club after his mistress. Cammy, who had watched the entire exchange from the doorway, her face pale, walked over. "Naruto, do you have a death wish?" "Just doing my job, Cammy." That was an original vampire. As in, the originals. The ones who started it all. The ones who run Marcel, who runs this city. "She seemed nice enough," Naruto said, turning his attention back to the street. "She, nice." Cammy just shook her head, looking at him like he was a different species. You're not human, are you?" Naruto looked at her, his blue eyes softened for a moment. Nobody's perfect. He let the conversation die, and Cammy, smart enough to know when to quit, retreated back to the safety of her bar. The rest of his shift passed in a blur of noise and people. But he wasn't watching the tourists anymore. He was watching the door. A strange, unfamiliar tension coiling in his stomach. He hadn't felt this, curious, in a very long time. His shift ended at 3 a.m. The quarter was finally quieting down. The last of the drunk tourists staggering back to their hotels. The air was thick and cool now, the humidity having broken into a light, misty drizzle. He shrugged off the blazer, tossing it over his shoulder, and started his walk home. He lived in a small apartment above a closed-down bakery in the bywater. It was quiet, and it was far from the supernatural circus of the quarter. He preferred it that way. He'd made it 3 blocks, the tap-tap-tap of his boots on the wet cobblestones the only sound, when he felt it. He was being followed. He didn't slow down. He didn't look back. He just kept walking, his senses flaring open. He could hear 4 distinct sets of footsteps, trying to be silent, but their predatory arrogance made them clumsy to his ears. He could smell them, the same dusty, metallic scent of the local vampires. Not the ancient, powerful scent of the woman, Rebekah. These were children, by comparison. He turned left, into a narrow, unlit alleyway that ran bedway. A brick warehouse and an old Creole townhouse. The scent of garbage and stale rainwater washed over him. It was a dead end. He stopped, standing in the middle of the alley, and turned around. A moment later, 4 figures blocked the entrance, silhouetted against the faint glow of the street lamp behind them. He recognized Thierry, the cruel-mouthed one from the club. Dead end, new blood, Thierry sneered. His fangs were already extended, his face a grotesque mask of black veins and red eyes. Marcel doesn't like it when people disrespect his guests. Especially not an original. It's bad for business. She got in, didn't she? Naruto said, dropping his blazer to the wet ground. He cracked his neck, the sound echoing in the narrow space. It's the principle of the thing, another one said, this one a woman with dark, curly hair. You embarrassed him. You embarrassed us. So, Naruto said, shifting into a relaxed, ready stance. You're here to, what? Teach me a lesson. We're here to pull your arms off, Thierry said. And then he moved. Vampire speed was impressive. To a human, it was a blur, an instant translation from one point to another. To Naruto, it was just, fast. Thierry lunged, aiming to grab him by the throat. Naruto didn't move back. He moved in. He pivoted on his heel, his hand coming up in a knife-edge strike. It wasn't a punch. It was a focused, precise application of force. His hand struck the inside of Thierry's elbow. There was a sickening, wet pop as the joint hyperextended and shattered. Thierry roared, a sound of shock and pain, and stumbled back, clutching his arm, which now bent at an impossible, grotesque angle. My arm. He broke my arm. He shrieked, his composure gone. The other 3, who had been laughing, froze. Their faces went from arrogant to furious. They all blurred into motion at once. This was what Naruto had been trained for his entire life. Close quarters combat, taijutsu. The woman lunged from his left. He ducked under her wild, claw-handed swing, his right fist driving up into her solar plexus. It wasn't a killing blow, but it was powerful. The thud of the impact was absolute. All the air left her lungs in a whoosh, and she crumpled to the ground. Gasping like a fish, a third vampire came from the right, grabbing a rusted pipe from a dumpster and swinging it at Naruto's head. Naruto caught the pipe mid-swing. The vampire's eyes widened. He tried to pull it free, but it was like pulling a piece of rebar from solid concrete. Naruto yanked the vampire forward, off balance, and met his incoming charge with a brutal headbutt. There was a crunch of cartilage as Naruto's skull, unnaturally dense, shattered the vampire's nose. The vampire fell back, screaming and clutching his ruined face. It had taken less than 5 seconds. Thierry was back on his feet, his arm already knitting back together with audible snaps and crunches. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. You'll pay for that, you, whatever you are. He lunged again, more frenzied this time, but Naruto had seen his moves. He was all strength, no technique. Naruto sidestepped the charge, his leg sweeping out, kicking Thierry's ankle from under him. As the vampire fell, Naruto brought his heel down on the back of his knee, severing tendons. Thierry crashed to the pavement. The 4th vampire, who had been hanging back, just stared. His eyes wide with a terror that was entirely new to him. You, he stammered. You're not human. Took you long enough, Naruto said, his voice cold. This was the moment. The 4th vampire made a choice. He turned and fled, blurring down the alley. Naruto let him go. He needed a messenger. Naruto turned back to Thierry, who was on the ground, his body already healing, his rage palpable. You're dead. Thierry spat, blood and spittle flying from his mouth. When Klaus hears what you did. Klaus? Naruto asked, tilting his head. He'll rip you apart. He'll have to find me first, Naruto said, crouching down. What are you waiting for? Get it over with. Thierry snarled, baring his fangs. Stake me. You don't have the guts. Naruto looked at him, his blue eyes unreadable in the dark. Stake. That's not my style. He felt it then. The old, familiar, coiled power inside him. The thing he'd been since he'd woken up in this strange, new world. He was a vampire, yes. He had the speed, the strength, the thirst. But he was also something else. He was still Uzumaki. He was still the vessel of the Nine Tails. And in this world, the fusion of those energies had created something new. What are you? Thierry's voice wavered as he saw the change in Naruto's eyes. Naruto opened his mouth. His own fangs extended, longer and sharper than Thierry's. But it was his eyes that made the vampire scream. They bled from blue to a burning, feral red, his pupils elongating into vertical slits. A low, animalistic growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that shook the very air. "This is going to hurt," Naruto said. And he bit him. His fangs sank into Thierry's throat. Thierry thrashed, expecting the familiar pain, the rip and tear. He got something infinitely worse. The moment Naruto's fangs made contact, a light, brilliant and golden, erupted from the wound. It wasn't blood that flowed, it was fire. Thierry shrieked. It was a sound of pure, spiritual agony. It wasn't a normal bite. It wasn't werewolf venom, a slow-acting poison. This was purification. This was unmaking. The golden energy, Naruto's own life force, his chakra, fused with his vampire curse, poured into Thierry's system. It acted as a divine, cleansing agent. It attacked the ancient magic that held him together. Thierry's veins lit up, not with black, but with that same burning gold. His skin began to crack, smoke pouring from the fissures. He convulsed on the ground, his eyes wide with an impossible, existential terror. He wasn't just dying, he was being erased. In less than 10 seconds. It was over. The screaming stopped. Where Thierry had been, there was only a pile of black and gold, smoldering ash. Naruto stood up, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. The golden light faded from his eyes, returning them to their piercing blue. The other two vampires he'd taken down were gone, having fled in terror while he was occupied. He looked at the pile of ash. So it works on them, too. Good to know. He was alone in the alley, the misty rain starting to hiss as it hit the still glowing embers. He picked up his blazer, slung it over his shoulder, and turned to leave. And froze. Standing at the mouth of the alley, where the 4 vampires had been, were 3 new figures. He hadn't heard them. He hadn't sensed them. It was as if the air itself had just produced them. One was a man in an immaculate, expensive suit. His hair was coiffed, his posture rigid. He looked at the scene with a cold, analytical displeasure. He smelled of old paper, leather, and something ancient. The second was the woman. Rebekah. Her face was no longer playful. Her arms were crossed, her lipstick a slash of crimson in her pale face. She was staring at the pile of ash, her jaw tight. And the third. The third man stood between them. He was shorter than the man in the suit, but his presence was a black hole, drawing all light and attention to him. He had curly, dirty blonde hair and a roguish, handsome face that was currently fixed in an expression of absolute, skin-crawling fascination. His eyes, a bright, piercing blue-green, were locked on the pile of glowing ash. He could smell it. Naruto knew he could. He could smell the finality of it. This, Naruto knew instantly, was a predator at the absolute apex of the food chain. The scent rolling off H.I.M. was a complex symphony of ancient vampirism, of wet fur and forest floor, and something else. Death. He was the original hybrid. This was Klaus. Klaus Mikaelson slowly, raised his eyes from the ash to meet Naruto's. He wasn't looking at Naruto with anger, or with the arrogance of Thierry. He was looking at him with the same expression a man might have if he'd just seen a wolf turn into a hurricane. It was a look of pure, primal, bottomless fear. He, who feared nothing but the white oak stake, had just found something new. The man in the suit, Elijah, spoke first, his voice a perfectly controlled baritone. That was quite the display. Rebekah just stared at Naruto, her eyes wide. But it was Klaus who took a half-step forward, his hands clenched at his sides. His terror was already being eclipsed by a tide of paranoid, possessive rage. He looked from the ash, to his sister, and back to the blond man standing in the alley. "What?" Klaus Mikaelson whispered, his voice trembling with 1,000 years of repressed nightmares. "In the bloody hell, are you?" Naruto met his gaze, unintimidated. He let the blazer fall from his shoulder again. The night was quiet, the air electric. "I'm the guy who wants to be left alone," Naruto said. The challenge was issued. The lines were drawn, and in the heart of the French Quarter, the old world order had just met its first, and final, exception. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Always and forever is a long time to fight. The silence in the alley was louder than the fight had been. It was a thick, ringing vacuum, broken onl. Why by the hiss of the misty rain on the smoldering pile of golden ash. Klaus Mikelson's fear, so pure and primal a moment ago, was already hardening, crystallizing into the familiar, toxic diamond of his rage. His eyes flickered from the ash to Naruto, then to his sister, Rebekah. He saw the shock on her face, the unnerving, profound interest in her eyes, and his rage found its focus. "Well," Klaus breathed, his voice a low, dangerous purr that was meant to sound casual and failed spectacularly. "You've certainly made an entrance." Naruto said nothing. He simply stood, a neutral expression on his face. His body relaxed but radiating a "don't touch" energy that was as potent as a physical barrier. He was a perfect, calm statue in the center of their chaotic world. "Niklas, the man in the suit," Elijah said, his voice a velvet-covered brick. He took a single, measured step forward, his eyes never leaving Naruto, but his hand raised slightly to forestall his brother. "I suggest we move this conversation somewhere more appropriate." The abattoir. It was not a question. It was a summons. Klaus shot his brother a look. "Move him. I'll move his head from his shoulders." "And what if you can't?" Elijah's voice was sharp, cutting through Klaus's bluster. He turned his gaze fully on his brother. "Did you not see what he did? That was not witchery. That was something else. Something final. We will not engage a threat of this magnitude in a back-alley brawl like common thugs." He then looked back to Naruto. His face was a mask of cold, aristocratic politeness. "You will accompany us. We have much to discuss." Naruto finally shifted. He bent down, picked up his discarded blazer, and slung it over his shoulder, the motion fluid and unhurried. He knew exactly who they were. He'd spent his week learning the city's power structure. He had been waiting for this, in a way. He was an apex predator, and he had just announced his presence to the nest's current rulers. "All right," Naruto said, his voice simple. "But let's get one thing straight. I'm not your prisoner. I'm not your guest. I'm a guy going for a walk. You can walk with me." Rebekah's lips parted, a small, involuntary sound of disbelief escaping her. No one, in 1,000 years, had ever spoken to her brothers that way. Not and lived. Elijah's eyebrow twitched, the only sign of his surprise. "As you wish." The abattoir, then. Klaus looked like he was about to physically explode. He versus sped, appearing an inch from Naruto's face, his own hybrid features, the black veins, the golden, predatory eyes, flaring to life. "You were in my city. You just turned one of my men to dust. You will speak when spoken to, or I will." He was cut off, not by a punch, or a word, but by the sheer, crushing weight of Naruto's presence. Naruto didn't flare his eyes. He didn't show his fangs. He just looked at Klaus. His blue eyes, clear and deep as the open ocean, held a stillness that was more terrifying than any rage. It was the calm of the hurricane's eye. It was the absolute, unshakable confidence of a being who knew, with empirical certainty, that he was the most dangerous thing in that alley. Klaus's hybrid face flickered. He felt it. A pressure, like the air thickening, pushing back against his own ancient, predatory aura. He could feel the power rolling off this man, a sleeping ocean of it, and he had the sudden, chilling sensation that he was a wolf growling at a tsunami. "Klaus," Elijah said again, his voice firm. "Do not." Klaus snarled, a low, frustrated sound, and the hybrid mask receded, leaving behind the pale, paranoid man. He took a single, jerky step back. "Fine. But one trick, one hint of a lie, and I'll find out what color your intestines are." Naruto just nodded, as if Klaus had merely commented on the weather. "Lead the way." The walk to the abattoir was the most tension-filled 10 minutes of Rebekah's immortal life. They didn't walk as a group. Elijah walked in front with Naruto, the two of them moving at a brisk, human pace, a gentleman and his anomaly. Klaus stalked behind them, his fists clenching and unclenching, his every line radiating barely leashed violence. Rebekah walked beside her hybrid brother, her mind racing. She watched the bouncer. He wasn't a bouncer. He was something else. He walked into the lion's den without a flicker of fear. He looked at the centuries-old architecture of the French Quarter with a casual, almost anthropological interest. He was, she realized, completely and utterly alone, and he seemed perfectly comfortable with that. It was a state she'd craved her entire life, and one she'd never been allowed to have. They entered the vast, stone-flagged courtyard of the Mikaelson compound. The air was cooler here, heavy with the scent of old wine, dust, and the faint, coppery tang of old blood. The place was a fortress, built to keep the world out, and to keep its prisoners in. Elijah gestured to an ornate, wrought iron chair. Please. Naruto sat, dropping his blazer on the ground beside him. He looked, for all the world, like a man who had just stopped for coffee, not a captive in the lair of monsters. Klaus began to pace. He was a caged lion. His steps frantic, his energy filling the courtyard with a palpable, buzzing threat. All right, Klaus snapped, whirling on Naruto. The games are over. Who sent you? Was it the witches? My mother. Trying for another round. Did Genevieve find some new, pathetic champion? No one sent me, Naruto said, his voice echoing slightly in the stone enclosure. Lies. Klaus roared. He picked up a nearby chair, one of an antique set worth more than a house, and hurled it against the far wall, where it exploded into a spray of splinters. That power. It reeked of nature. It was a perversion of it. You're a witch's attack dog. I'm not a witch, Naruto said simply. I'm not an attack dog. I'm just me. And what, precisely, Elijah interjected, his voice slicing cleanly through Klaus's rage, is me. You resisted your compulsion, Rebekah. You healed from a wound that would have staggered a normal vampire. And you unmade one of Marcel's. He laced his fingers, his expression one of intense, academic focus. You are an unknown quantity. And in my experience, unknown quantities are, almost without exception, liabilities. So, you will talk. You will tell us what you are, and what you want. Naruto leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He looked from Elijah's cold, analytical face to Klaus's furious one. What I am is complicated, he said. What I want is simple. I want to be left alone. I don't care about your city, your king, or your family drama. I'm just passing through. But your man, Thierry, he and his friends decided to corner me. They decided to make my business theirs. So I finished it. Klaus laughed, a wild, sharp sound. You obliterated him. You cleansed him. The word came out as a curse. He was a bully, Naruto said, his eyes hardening for the first time. I don't like bullies. He picked a fight he couldn't win. End of story. That is not the end of the story. Klaus bellowed. This is my city, my family, my rules. You come here, a thing we have no name for, capable of destroying us, and you expect us to just, what? Let you pass through us. Naruto's head tilted. He wasn't one of you. He was just a vampire. A new one, at that. I can smell the difference. Klaus froze. What did you say? He was, maybe 50, 60 years old. Weak. You, he said, nodding at Klaus, then at Elijah, then at Rebekah. You're different. You smell older, stronger, like a root cellar, or a cracked tomb. He was just spoiled milk. The blunt, almost dismissive assessment of their ancient power left them momentarily speechless. Rebekah, who had been watching from the second-floor balcony, her arms crossed, couldn't help it. She spoke, her voice cutting through the courtyard. He's not wrong, Nick. You do smell like a tomb. Klaus's head snapped up, his glare venomous. Rebekah, this does not concern you. It concerned me when he stared me down at the club, she said, descending the wrought iron staircase. Her heels clicking on the metal. It concerned me when Thierry and his idiots decided to avenge my honor, without my permission. And it definitely concerns me now that he's sitting in our courtyard. Looking about as intimidated as a house cat, she reached the bottom of the stairs and walked toward Naruto. She stopped a few feet from him, crossing her arms. You talk a big game. You're not afraid of them. Are you? Should I be? Naruto asked, his gaze meeting hers. Yes. Klaus roared. Yes, you fool, you should be. Do you have any idea who we are? We are the original family. We are the progenitors of your entire pathetic species. We are, for all intents and purposes, gods in this city. Naruto held his gaze for a long, quiet moment. The courtyard was silent as avenue for the frantic buzzing of a cicada somewhere in the stone. Then, Naruto gave a small, weary sigh. I've dealt with people who thought they were gods, he said, his voice quiet, but it carried to every corner of the courtyard. They were loud, arrogant, and they bled just like everyone else. He looked from Klaus to Elijah, his blue eyes holding no malice, only a profound, ancient exhaustion. You're just old. The sheer, unadulterated insolence of it hung in the air. Klaus was, for the first time in centuries, at a complete loss for words. His rage was so total, so pure, that it had no outlet. He was vibrating, a string pulled too tight, about to snap. Elijah, however, merely raised an eyebrow. The mask was back in place. You are either suicidally brave, he said, or you are some thing that has truly earned the right to such confidence. We shall have to discover which. Klaus turned, his back to them. I'm going to get a drink. And when I return, this thing will either be talking, or I will be peeling the skin from his bones, 1 inch at a time. He blurred out of the courtyard, the whoosh of his passing stirring the dust. Elijah smoothed the front of his suit jacket. A regrettable, if predictable, outburst. I must make a call. Our guests' actions will have rippled through the witch community. I must manage the narrative. He looked at Rebekah. See that he remains. He, too, walked out, but at a calm, human pace, his footsteps echoing his cold, perfect control. The courtyard was suddenly, shockingly, quiet. It was just Naruto and Rebekah. She stared at him, her arms still crossed, 100 questions warring for priority in her mind. He, in turn, just looked back, his posture relaxed once more. Finally, she broke the silence. You're insane. You know that, don't you? Completely and utterly barking mad. He was the one yelling, Naruto pointed out. He's Klaus. He's the original hybrid. He gets to yell. People who don't let him yell end up as, well, as smears on the pavement. She uncrossed her arms and took a step closer, her curiosity now a palpable force. How? The compulsion. At the club. How did you do that? He did it to me just now. In the alley. I did the same thing, Naruto said, shrugging. He tried to push. I didn't let him. It's not. You can't just not let him. She said, her voice rising in frustration. It's compulsion. It's an order backed by 1,000 years of power. You're either immune, or you're not. And you're a vampire. I can smell it on you, so you can't be immune. I'm not, he agreed. It's just a matter of will. My will is stronger. Rebekah stared at him. Stronger than an original's. Impossible. And yet, and the bite, she said, her voice dropping. Thierry, he's just gone. Not dead, not staked. Gone. Like he never existed. What was that? That golden light. Naruto's expression tightened. He looked away from her, his gaze falling on the splintered remains of the chair Klaus had thrown. That's me, he said, his voice low. My energy. It's life. Pure, concentrated life. Your kind, your magic, it's an affront to it. My bite. It doesn't poison. It unmakes. Rebekah felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the night air. Unmakes, she whispered. She looked at her own hands. Can you do that too, to us? To an original? Naruto was silent for a long moment. He looked back at her, his blue eyes holding a sudden, profound sadness. I don't know, he said. And the terrifying part was, she knew he was lying. He did know. She took another step back. A new kind of fear dawning. He was a walking white oak stake. A living, breathing weapon that could end her, her brothers, her entire family. You walk around like you don't have a single ally in the world, she said, the words coming out in a rush, a mix of fear and a strange, aching familiarity. Is that it? You're just alone, so you don't care if you die. Naruto met her gaze, and the sadness was still there. It's a small club, he said, echoing her own thoughts from earlier. Being alone. Being different. Hated for just being. He wasn't talking about being a vampire. He was talking about something deeper. Something older. And Rebekah Mikaelson, the girl who had been daggered by her own family more times than she could count, the woman who had loved and lost for 1,000 years, felt a sudden, sharp, and utterly unwanted pang of connection. She, more than anyone, knew what that felt in. He wasn't just a monster. He was, like her. Before she could say another word, there was a whoosh of air, and Klaus was back. His eyes were wild. He had fed, but it hadn't calmed him. If anything, the sight of his sister standing there, talking to this anomaly with an expression of dawning sympathy, had shattered the last of his control. Enough of this, he roared. His paranoia and his possessiveness, his two most defining traits, had collided. I'm done with games. I'm done with your quiet, arrogant little answers. Nick, don't, Rebekah shouted, but it was too late. Klaus moved. He crossed the courtyard in less than a heartbeat, his hand a clawed blur aimed at Naruto's throat, intending to rip it out. What happened next defied 1,000 years of combat experience. Naruto didn't blur. He didn't meet Klaus's supernatural speed with his own. He just reacted. As Klaus's hand shot forward, Naruto moved inside the attack. He pivoted, his body a fluid, coiled spring. His left hand came up, not to block, but to parry, his open palm striking Klaus's wrist, deflecting the killing blow by a mere inch. Simultaneously, his right hand, flat and rigid as a spear, struck Klaus 3 times in the chest. Thud, thud, thud. They weren't super punches. They were precise, kinetic, perfect strikes aimed at the ribs, the sternum, and the solar plexus. All the air exploded from Klaus's lungs. He, the original hybrid, who had leveled armies, stumbled. He was winded. He was stunned. No one had ever landed a clean blow on him, let alone 3. The shock on his face was absolute. It lasted for a single second before it was consumed by an ocean of incandescent rage. You dare, he roared, and this time he didn't just attack. He unleashed. He put his full, unholy, original hybrid power into his assault. He became a blur of motion. A whirlwind of fists and fangs meant to tear, rend, and destroy. And it was useless. Naruto was a golden blue blur in the center of the storm. He wasn't stronger. He wasn't, perhaps, even faster. He was just better. He was a master martial artist against a 1,000-year-old brawler. Klaus's every wild, powerful swing was met with a precise, economical block. A redirecting parry, a fluid, evasive duck. Naruto's feet were planted, his core solid, his hands and arms a blur of defensive motion that was almost beautiful. He was using Klaus's own impossible strength against him, turning his momentum, making him overextend, making him miss. Rebekah watched, her hand over her mouth. Elijah had reappeared on the balcony, his face a mask of cold, profound shock. Klaus was the most feared creature on the planet. And he was being humiliated. He was being outclassed. Fight me, Klaus screamed, frustrated, landing a glancing blow off Naruto's shoulder that did nothing. I am, Naruto said, his voice calm, breathless. With a roar of pure, animalistic fury, Klaus broke off the assault. He was panting, his eyes blazing. You're fast, but are you immortal? He lunged, but not to punch. He opened his mouth, his hybrid fangs, long, serrated, and dripping with werewolf venom, sinking deep into Naruto's shoulder. Rebekah cried out, Niklaus, no. Klaus ripped his fangs free, a chunk of flesh with them. And he landed a few feet away, a triumphant, bloody grin on his face. He spat the piece of Naruto onto the flagstones. There, a little hybrid welcome. Let's see your pure life handle that. That's a poison for which there is no. His words died in his throat. Naruto just stood there. He looked at the gaping, bloody, steaming wound on his shoulder. And as they all watched, the torn muscle and flesh writhed. It knit itself back together. The skin sealed. In the space of 3 heartbeats, the wound, a wound that would kill any normal vampire, and agonizingly cripple even an original for hours, was gone. There was not so much as a scar. Naruto slowly raised his eyes, the blood from his own shoulder still smeared on his chin. He met Klaus's horrified, disbelieving gaze. My turn, Naruto whispered. Before Klaus could even process the words, before he could raise his hands, before he could even think to move, Naruto was on him. It wasn't a blur. It was a teleport. One instant, he was across the courtyard. The next, he had Klaus by the throat and the arm, slamming him back against a stone pillar with a crack that shook the compound. Klaus, the original hybrid, could not break his grip. The bouncer's hands were vices of steel. "What are you?" Klaus choked, his feet dangling off the ground. Naruto's answer was a growl. His face transformed. His blue eyes bled into a burning, feral red. The pupils elongating into black, vertical slits. His fangs, when they extended, were longer, sharper, almost saber-like. A low, menacing, animalistic rumble came from his chest, a sound that shook Klaus to his very core. And he bit him. He sank his fangs deep into Klaus's shoulder, right in the same spot Klaus had bitten him. Klaus Mikaelson screamed. It was not a roar of anger. It was not a cry of pain. It was the same, soul-shattering shriek of existential agony they had heard from Thierry in the alley. A volcano of golden light erupted from the wound. It didn't just burn. It purified. It cleansed. It unraveled. The golden fire traced Klaus's veins, lighting him up like a circuit board of divine judgment. The wound didn't heal. It sizzled. Black, corrupted blood steamed, and evaporated before it could even hit the ground. Naruto held him for a long, agonizing second, then threw him to the stone floor. Klaus landed in a heap, convulsing. He scrambled to his knees, clutching his shoulder, his eyes wide with a terror that eclipsed anything he had ever known. "What?" he gasped, staring at the wound. It wasn't healing. He tried to draw on his strength, his vampiric speed, his wolf's resilience. Nothing. It was all gone. The pain was immense, but worse, there was a weakness. A cold, creeping mortality. Niklaus. Elijah was there in an instant, blurring from the balcony to his brother's side. His composed mask shattered by genuine panic. It won't heal, Elijah, Klaus whispered, his voice trembling. I can't heal." Rebekah just stood there, her hands to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. The intrigue was gone. The fascination was gone. This was just terror. At that exact moment, a new figure swept into the courtyard, a Wam. And with blonde hair and an aura of ancient power. Rebekah Mikaelson. Elijah had clearly summoned her. "Brother, what is it?" I felt. She stopped dead, her witch's senses reeling from the power in the air. She saw the golden, burning wound on Klaus's shoulder. She saw the panic on Elijah's face. And she saw the man standing across from them, his red slit eyes slowly fading back to blue, his chest heaving, not from exertion, but from the adrenaline of a dominance finally, and absolutely, asserted. Klaus, the most powerful and feared being on the planet, was on his knees. And the only thing that could save him was the very monster that had broken him. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Price of the Cure. The silence in the courtyard was a living, breathing thing, heavier and more suffocating than the humid night air. It was a silence of three distinct flavors. Elijah's, which was the cold, sharp vacuum of shattered calculations. Rebekah's, the breathless, tear-filled shock of a miracle she'd never wanted to witness. And Klaus's, which was the sibilant, steaming silence of a dying star. He was on the stone floor, on his hands and knees, his body convulsing in silent, agonizing waves. The wound on his shoulder was not a wound. It was a void. It was a crater of sizzling, golden light, a miniature sun eating away at his immortal flesh. It was not bleeding. The blood was being unmade before it could even spill. Freya, who had swept in expecting a simple magical threat, stood frozen by the staircase. Her witch's senses were screaming. The air was thick, not with the familiar scent of spellcraft, of herbs, of blood, of sacrifice, but with an energy that was so pure, so alien, that it felt like standing too close to a furnace. What is this?" she breathed, her eyes wide, locked on the wound. It's not magic. It's like a song, but it's screaming." "He bit him," Rebekah whispered, her voice trembling. "He bit him." Klaus let out a low, choking gasp, a sound of such profound animal pain that it broke Elijah's paralysis. Niklaus. Elijah blurred, reappearing at his brother's side, his hands hovering, unsure of what to do. who had a plan for every contingency, a solution for every apocalypse, was utterly, terrifyingly useless. His eyes snapped up to Naruto, who still stood by the pillar, his feral red eyes fading back to a piercing, watchful blue. The adrenaline of the fight was receding, leaving a cold, hard calm. In that instant, Elijah's entire worldview, a world where his family was the apex, the unassailable, the always and forever, shattered. He was faced with a truth he could not process, a greater predator. And Elijah Mikaelson did what he always did when his family was threatened. He attacked, he moved. He was not a brawler like Klaus, he was a duelist. His speed was a scalpel, precise and lethal. He crossed the courtyard, his hand rigid, a spear strike aimed not at Naruto's throat, but at his heart, intending to rip it from his chest before he could even blink. He was fast. He was an original. He wasn't fast enough. Naruto didn't even look at him. His gaze was still locked on the gasping, dying Klaus. As Elijah's hand blurred toward his chest, Naruto's left hand shot up, not in a block, but in a simple, casual catch. He caught Elijah's wrist mid-strike. The smack of the impact was dull and final. All of Elijah's 1,000-year-old momentum, his killing intent, his supernatural force, just stopped. It hit the immovable object. Elijah's perfectly composed, aristocratic face contorted in a mask of stunned disbelief. He pulled. He strained. He was, for the first time in his life, held. Naruto finally turned his head, his blue eyes meeting Elijah's. His voice was quiet, but it was not a whisper. It was a command. Don't. You can't win. And he's dying. You're wasting time. He let go. He didn't throw Elijah's hand back. He just released it. Elijah stumbled, catching his balance, his face a complex mask of humiliation and raw, unadulterated panic. He looked at his hand, then at Naruto. He was, for the first time, truly afraid. Freya, he barked, his voice losing its velvet edge, cracking with urgency. Do something. Heal him. Freya ran forward, her hands already glowing with blue light. She knelt beside Klaus, chanting in a rapid, guttural Norwegian. She placed her hands over the golden, sizzling wound. The moment her magic touched it, she screamed and was thrown back, as if by an explosion. She landed in a heap 10 feet away, her hands smoking, her magic recoiling. I can't, she shrieked, tears of frustration and terror in her eyes. It's not magic. It's life. It's pure. It's drinking my magic. She looked at her smoking palms. It's burning the magic out of me. It's like trying to patch a hole in a ship with more water, Naruto said, his voice cutting through their panic. They all stared at him. He looked at Klaus, who was now shivering, his skin taking on a pale, grayish tint. My energy, my chakra, it's a life force. Your immortality, it's not. It's a perversion, a spell of death and undeath. My bite, it sees it as a disease. It's curing him. Curing him, Rebekah whispered, horrified. It's killing him. No, Naruto said, his eyes locking with hers. It's making him mortal, and the shock of that's what's killing him. Klaus looked up, his eyes wide with a feverish, delirious terror. Michael, he whispered, his gaze unfocused. Father, no, this broke them, to see him not as the hybrid, but as the terrified, abused boy. What do you want? Elijah demanded, his voice raw. He straightened his suit, a pathetic, reflexive attempt to regain control. Money, power, this city, it's yours. Name your price. Fix him. Naruto looked at the three of them, the panicked duelist, the terrified witch, the broken-hearted sister. He looked at the dying tyrant on the floor. I'm not your enemy, he said, his voice weary. I told you, I just want to be left alone. He nodded at Klaus. He has, maybe a day. 2, if he's lucky. The unmaking is efficient. You should get him comfortable. He took a step toward the archway, to leave. No, Elijah blurred, blocking his path. You are not leaving. You will not leave this compound until my brother is healed. Naruto sighed. You can't stop me. I know, Elijah said, The admission seemed to pain him more than a physical blow. But I am asking, as a courtesy. Stay, please. Let us negotiate. Naruto looked at the archway, at the freedom of the city beyond. Then he looked back at Rebekah, who was just watching him, her face pale, her eyes pleading. He knew if he walked, they would hunt him. Not just them, but their entire line. It would never end. He had won the fight. Now he had to win the war. And that required something different. Fine, Naruto said. He gestured to the dungeon cells, the old slave quarters he'd sent it on his way in. Put me in there, if it makes you feel like you're in control. But I'm not your prisoner. I'm just waiting. The cell was damp, stone, and smelled of rust and old sorrow. It had a single, heavy, iron-barred door and a bare cot. Naruto sat on the cot, his back against the wall, his eyes closed. He was meditating, his senses extended. He felt the frantic, panicked energy of the house above him. He heard Klaus's pained, feverish murmurs. He heard Freya's frantic chanting as she tried spell after spell, each one failing like a wave against a cliff. He heard Elijah on the phone, his voice a low, furious murmur, managing the fallout. Marcel, no, he is indisposed. You will keep the city on lockdown. If one word of this gets out, I will end you myself. The panic was spreading. The sire line was feeling it. Klaus's thousands of children were weakening, and they were beginning to scream. He sat for hours. The sun began to rise, painting the small, high window of his cell in a weak, gray light. Then, he heard footsteps. Lighter than Elijah's, more hesitant. The scrape of the iron bar being lifted. The creak of the heavy door. Rebekah stood in the doorway. She wasn't dressed in her club finery. She was in a simple tank top and cotton pants, her hair pulled back, her face scrubbed clean of makeup. She looked young, and she looked 1,000 years old. She was holding a bottle of bourbon. Not a glass. The bottle. She didn't speak. She walked in, slid down the wall opposite him, and sat on the cold stone floor, a safe distance away. She uncapped the bottle and took a long, desperate pull. The silence stretched. It was a different silence, now. Awkward, heavy. You're just sitting here, she finally said, her voice rough. I'm meditating. They're all running around like the world is on fire. Elijah is. I've never seen him like this. He's lost. She took another drink. And you're just sitting. What would you like me to do? Naruto asked, his eyes still closed. You could start by not being so calm. It's unnerving. She tossed her head back against the stone. You could be halfway to Baton Rouge by now. Why are you still here? To watch him die. Running doesn't solve problems, Naruto said, his voice a low rumble. It just postpones them. I'm here because your brother, he finally opened his eyes, their blue intensity pinning her, is a bully. And he just picked a fight with the one person on the planet he can't beat. I'm here to finish it. He's dying, she whispered. Upstairs. My brother. He's in so much pain. He's delirious. He keeps calling for our father. He attacked me, Naruto said, not unkindly. He bit me. It didn't work. I bit him. It did. So that's it. Her voice cracked, a sudden, sharp spike of anger. An eye for an eye. You're just going to sit here and let him die. I'm not letting him do anything, Naruto said, his patience thinning. He's a consequence. He's been living a life without them for 1,000 years. I'm the first consequence he can't kill, bully, or buy. And you're all losing your minds over it. Rebekah flinched. She stared into her bourbon, swirling the amber liquid. He was right, and that made her hate him. And hate her brother. He's a monster, she said, her voice dropping so low he had to strain to hear it. He's a tyrant, a paranoid, suffocating, manipulative bastard. She looked up, and he was shocked to see a single, hot tear trace a path through the dust on her cheek. But he's my brother, she choked out. He's all I have. He and Elijah, Freya, were all we have. Naruto's gaze softened. He studied her, not as an original, not as an enemy, but as a person. Is that why you let him do it? He asked, his voice quiet. Do what? She said, her voice thick. Dagger you, stick you in a box. Over, and over, and over. For decades, for centuries, every time you find a moment of happiness. Every time you find someone to love. He takes it, and he puts you back in the dark. The bottle slipped from her hand, landing on the dusty floor with a thud, the bourbon gurgling out. She was staring at him, her face a mask of pale, naked shock. How could you possibly know that? I hear things, he said, tapping his temple. I watch, but mostly, I know the look. He leaned his head back against the wall, mirroring her. The look of someone so desperate for a family. So desperate for any kind of bond, that they'll let it destroy them. They'll take any abuse, any pain, just so they don't have to be alone. He was talking about her. But the raw, ancient pain in his own voice, the profound loneliness, he was talking about himself. He was talking about a village that hated him, about a friend he'd torn the world apart to save, only to be betrayed. He was talking about the life of a Jinchuriki. Rebekah stared at him. The wall between them, the thousands of years of her existence, his alien nature, it all dissolved. In that dank, dark cell, she wasn't an original, he wasn't a monster. They were just the two loneliest people on the planet. She didn't just cry, she sobbed. It was a raw, ugly, thousand-year-old sound, a dam of pain and rage and desperate, hopeless love breaking all at once. I hate him, she screamed, her fists balled. I hate him for what he's done to me. To Elijah, to all of us, and I'm so terrified to lose him. Do you know what that's like? To be trapped, to love the thing that's killing you. Naruto's expression was one of profound, heartbreaking empathy. He pushed himself off the cot, crossed the small cell, and sat on the floor. Not next to her, but in front of her. Close enough to be a presence. Yes, he said, his voice raw. I do. She looked up at him, her eyes red, her face a mess. Then why are you letting this happen? Because, if I fix him, what happens next? He comes for me, he comes for you, the next time you look at a boy he doesn't like. The cycle just continues. He never learns. Before she could answer, the cell door was flung open, slamming against the stone wall. Elijah and Freya stood there. Their faces were beyond desperate. They were broken. He's fading, Elijah said. His voice was a rasp. His suit was rumpled, his tie gone. His entire sire line. They're dying. Vampires in Chicago, London, they're desiccating. It's a massacre. The Volturi are already mobilizing. The witches are. It's the end of the world, do you understand me? Always and forever, has created an apocalypse. Freya stepped forward, her eyes locked on Naruto. What do you want? I can't fix him. But you're the source. You can. Name it. Money. Power. A kingdom. It's yours. Whatever it is, it's yours. Just, please, save him. Save us. Naruto stood up, his gaze hard. He was in control. He looked past them, at the dying god in the bedroom. I told you what I want, he said, his voice ringing with a new, cold authority. A truce. You leave me alone. You, your family, your little vampire king, your witch allies, you leave me, and anyone I decide to call a friend, alone. You don't hunt me. You don't test me. You don't try to control me. You see me in the street, you nod. You treat me as what I am. What you are. Elijah scoffed, a last spark of his old arrogance. A monster. An equal, Naruto countered, his voice dropping. Or a superior. Your choice. That's my offer. You take it, or you don't. And you have, maybe an hour. We agree, Freya said, her voice shaking. We agree to the truce. Now, how do you fix this? Here it was. The leverage. My bite unmakes, Naruto said, his voice low. My energy. It's curing him of his immortality. Permanently. It's a poison he can't fight. He held up his right hand. He focused, and a small, glowing gold bead of chakra formed on his fingertip. My energy is the poison. He clenched his fist, then held out his left arm. With his right fingernail, he drew a sharp, clean line across his forearm. Blood welled, but it wasn't just red. It was glowing, a brilliant, golden crimson light. It was so vibrant, so alive, that it pulsed, illuminating the dark cell. But my blood, he said, is the cure. It's the source. A single drop will reset the bite. It will halt the unmaking. It will restore the abomination, and save your entire, pathetic, sire line. Elijah and Freya stared at the glowing blood, mesmerized. It was hope. It was salvation. Give it to me, Elijah demanded, his voice hoarse, taking a step forward. Naruto closed his fist, the wound on his arm healing instantly. No, we agree to the truce. Elijah roared, his control snapping. You do, Naruto said, his eyes hard. He doesn't, and he's the one who matters. He's the one who will come for me the second he's healed. The truce is meaningless unless he agrees. He jerked his head toward the stairs. I need to hear him say it. They went upstairs. The entire, broken, desperate family. The master bedroom was a disaster. Sheets were torn, furniture overturned. And in the center of the bed, Klaus Mikaelson was diminished. He was pale, his skin gray and translucent, his breathing a shallow, wet rattle. The golden wound on his shoulder had spread. It was a spiderweb of light, erasing him. But he was lucid. His eyes, though sunken, were wide and blazing with a mixture of terror and undiluted hate. Elijah, he rasped. Niklas, Elijah said, rushing to his bedside. He explained the terms, quickly, desperately. The truce. He has the cure. His blood. You must agree to the truce. Klaus's head lolled on the pillow. He looked past Elijah, his gaze locking on Naruto, who stood in the doorway, a neutral observer to this family's final collapse. Klaus, even on his deathbed, even with the world ending, was pure, uncut, toxic pride. I'll not, he choked out, a bloody foam on his lips. I'll not be blackmailed. Not by this creature. I would rather die. ... I will see you all in hell first. Elijah staggered back, as if struck. Freya let out a low, hopeless keen. He was doing it. He was killing himself. And thousands of others, out of pure, spiteful, arrogant pride. Rebekah had been standing by the window, watching her last, desperate hope for survival rise, and now, watching it crash against the immovable object of her brother's ego. She snapped. But she didn't turn on Klaus. She turned on Naruto. Her face was a mask of white-hot rage, her grief so total it had burned past sorrow. She stormed across the room and slammed her fists against his chest. Thud, thud, thud. He didn't flinch. He just let her hit him. You can't, she screamed, her voice breaking, tears of fury streaming down her face. You can't let him do this. You can't let him die. He's making his choice, Rebekah, Naruto said, his voice firm, though he made no move to stop her assault. His choice, she shrieked, the sound inhuman. It's not just his choice. Don't you understand? If he dies, his entire line dies. Thousands. It will be a global war. Every faction, every enemy we have ever made, will descend on this city to pick the bones. They will come for Elijah. They will come for Freya. They will come for hope. For his daughter. She grabbed the front of his shirt, her knuckles white. He wants to die. Fine. Let the bastard rot. But don't you dare do this to me. I've spent 1,000 years running. I've been in boxes. I've been hunted. I've watched everyone I ever loved turn to dust. I will not be slaughtered in a war started by my brother's stupid, pathetic pride. Please. She wasn't begging for Klaus's life. She was begging for her life. It was the most selfish, most desperate, most honest plea he had ever heard. She collapsed against him, her fists still clenched in his shirt, her sobs muffled against his chest. Naruto stood there for a long, quiet moment. He looked over her head, at the stunned, silent faces of Elijah and Freya. He looked at the pathetic, dying, hateful man in the bed. Then he looked down at the terrified, broken, 1,000-year-old woman in his arms. He made his choice. All right, he whispered, so only she could hear it. All right. He gently unwrapped her hands from his shirt and stepped to the bedside. He looked at Klaus with something approaching pity. You hear me? This isn't for you. He raised his left arm. He bit his own wrist. The glowing, golden red blood welled up. He let it drip, not into a glass, not into a vial, but directly onto the festering, golden wound on Klaus's shoulder. Drip, drip, drip. The effect was instantaneous. It was violent. The two energies, the unmaking, bite and the curing, blood, collided. There was a hiss, like water on a fire. The golden, sizzling light of the wound was snuffed out. The unmaking, stopped. And then, the healing began. The gaping crater, which had moments ago been eating his flesh, began to close. The familiar, rapid, supernatural knitting of flesh, muscle, and skin, color flooded back into Klaus's face. His rattling gasp turned into a deep, sharp, ragged inhale. His strength returned in a visible, palpable wave. Klaus Mikaelson sat up in the bed. He looked at his shoulder. It was perfectly healed. Not a scar, not a mark. He was alive. He was whole. He was immortal again. The room was deathly quiet. Freya was weeping in relief. Elijah had his eyes closed, his hand over his face, his whole body trembling. Klaus slowly raised his head. He looked at Freya. He looked at Elijah. He looked at Rebekah, who was still standing by Naruto, her face a mess of tear-streaked disbelief. And then, his eyes locked on Naruto. He saw the man who had crippled him, the man who had humiliated him, and the man who had just, effortlessly, saved him. Klaus's paranoia, his hot-blooded rage, his feverish terror, it all vanished. It was burned away, leaving behind something new. Something far, far more dangerous. A cold, clear, crystalline, calculating hatred. He wasn't just a rabid dog anymore. He was a serpent. He knew he couldn't win a physical fight. He had just been proven, absolutely, to be the inferior being. And this new reality settled on him like a shroud of ice. He finally, slowly, smiled. It was a thin, terrifying, politician's smile. "Well, then," Klaus said, his voice perfectly smooth, as if he'd just woken from a pleasant nap. He swung his legs over the side of the bed. "I suppose we have a truce." Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Strix and the Scent of Blood. The abattoir had become a different kind of prison. In the 3 days since Klaus's near unmaking, the compound, once a fortress of Mikaelson power, had become a pressure cooker of paranoia, suspicion, and a terrifying, icy-cold politeness. Klaus was no longer raging. He was no longer throwing furniture. He was, by all appearances, the perfect, charming host. And it was 1,000 times more terrifying. He hadn't confined Naruto to the dungeon. Instead, he'd insisted he take a guest suite, one with fine linens, an antique armoire, and no bars on the windows, though they all knew the entire compound was a cage. Naruto spent most of his time in the central courtyard, sitting on the edge of the stagnant fountain, trying to meditate. But the quiet was false. He could feel Klaus watching him. Not from the balcony, but from everywhere. The hybrid would appear with a disarming smile, offering him a glass of centuries-old scotch, his eyes, no longer hot with rage, but cold as a frozen lake, analyzing, dissecting, and hating. "You're remarkably taciturn, for a man who holds the world in his hand," Klaus had said just that morning, swirling his own drink. "Tell me, does it get boring? Knowing you've already won every fight before it begins?" "It's not about winning," Naruto had replied, not looking up from his meditation. "It's about ending. Your fights never end. They just pause." Klaus's smile had tightened. A philosopher, then. How droll. Elijah was all business, his composure restored. He was on the phone constantly, his voice a silken, deadly tool of diplomacy. He was managing the fallout. The sire line had stabilized, but the panic had not. Rumors were spreading. A plague had nearly wiped out the original hybrid. The great, unkillable Klaus Mikaelson had been brought to his knees. And the sharks had begun to circle. Rebekah was the only one who seemed uncertain. She was caught between a profound, grudging gratitude and a lifetime of conditioned family loyalty. She would find excuses to be in the courtyard, ostensibly to read. But Naruto could feel her gaze on him, a mixture of fear, fascination, and an empathy she desperately wanted to extinguish. It was on the afternoon of the 3rd day that the shark finally showed its teeth. A courier, a human so clearly compelled he was vibrating with fear, was permitted to enter the courtyard. He carried a single, impossibly elegant, cream-colored envelope on a silver tray. It was sealed with a wax S in the shape of an Ouroboros. Elijah took it. He broke the seal, his eyes scanning the elegant script. His jaw tightened. "Well," he said, his voice flat. "It seems our actions have not gone unnoticed." Klaus, who had been sketching on a pad nearby, looked up, his interest piqued. "Who has dared to crawl from beneath a stone?" "An old friend," Elijah said, his voice laced with a distaste he rarely showed. Tristan de Martel, and, by extension, the Strix. Rebekah, who had been lounging on a chaise, sat up abruptly. The Strix, here, in New Orleans. I thought you put those decadent, arrogant pigs to pasture centuries ago. They are, as ever, a weed I have been unable to fully pull, Elijah said, handing the invitation to Klaus. They have taken up residence at the old governor's estate, and they are throwing a ball. Tonight, a masquerade. Klaus read the invitation, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. How bold. He then read the address line again, and his smile vanished. He held it up for Elijah to see. It was addressed to the Mikaelson family and their associate. The silence was absolute. Associate. The word was a perfectly aimed, perfectly polite insult. A declaration. They know, Freya said, emerging from the study, her face pale. The magic I felt. That anti-magic, that cleansing wave that almost killed you, Niklaus. It was felt by every witch coven from here to Rome. The Strix, with their network of witches, they don't just have rumors. They have facts. They know what he is. They know he's a weapon. Klaus seethed, crumpling the invitation in his fist. A weapon they now wish to see for themselves. We must go, Elijah said simply. All of us. Absolutely not, Klaus snarled, his cold mask cracking for a moment. I will not parade this thing in front of those preening, treacherous half-wits. They'll see him as a prize to be won, a sword to be aimed at our throats. And what will they think if we hide him? Elijah countered, his voice sharp. They will think we are afraid of him. That we can't control him. That we are weak. It will be an invitation for them to strike. To try and take him for themselves. No, we will go. We will present a united, unbreakable front. We will show them that this associate is under our protection. Our control. They will see his power. And they will attribute it to us. Klaus was pacing now, the lion's rage returning. Control. You think we control him? He is a rabid dog we've simply chosen not to put down. He humiliated me, Elijah. In our own home. And now you want me to accessorize with him. Naruto, who had been sitting on the fountain's edge, finally stood up. He was bored. He was bored of the cell, bored of the courtyard. Bored of this endless, repetitive, whisper-filled bickering. I'll go, he said. The three siblings froze, turning to look at him. This is not your decision, Klaus snapped. You're wrong, Naruto said, his voice flat. It is. Because if I don't go, you can't make me. And if I do go, you can't stop me. Your brothers are right, he said, nodding to Elijah. You're all terrified. You're trying to hide the new, bigger monster in the house. It's not working. The neighbors can hear him roaring. He looked at the crumpled invitation. A party. A masquerade. Fine. It's better than this dump. I'm sick of listening to you three argue. Before Klaus could explode, Rebekah stood up, a slow, dangerous, and decidedly defiant smile on her face. She was tired of being the pawn. She was tired of her brother's paranoia. And she was, more than anything, deeply, dangerously curious. She walked over to Naruto, her hips swaying, her eyes locked on his. He's right, Nick, it's a party. And if he's going, he can't very well go alone. She stopped an inch from Naruto, tilting her head back to look up at him. I need a date, and my brothers are, well, you know. She gave a little shrug. So, associate, what do you say? Feel like being my arm candy for the night. The challenge was so overt, so brazen, that it sucked the air from the courtyard. It was a declaration of defiance aimed straight at Klaus's heart. It was a thank you for her life, and a dare, all in one. Naruto looked at her, the fire in her eyes, the desperate, reckless courage. He recognized it. It was the same fire he had. A small, genuine smile touched his lips. Arm candy. I don't know. I was thinking of going as the chandelier. She laughed. A real, sudden, beautiful laugh. Smartass. Fine. But you're wearing a suit. A real suit. I will not be seen with you in that. She flicked the collar of his simple Henley. Deal, he said. It is not. Deal. Klaus roared, his face turning a shade of purple. It's settled, Niklaus. Elijah cut in, his voice a final, decisive blade. He looked at Klaus, his eyes dark. Let them have their arrangement. It serves our purpose, your sister, and her new bodyguard. It's a perfect narrative. Klaus looked from Elijah's traitorous logic to Rebekah's triumphant, mocking smile, and finally to Naruto, who just looked unimpressed. Klaus said nothing. He simply turned, his back ramrod straight, and stalked from the courtyard, the promise of 1,000 murders radiating from his silent form. The governor's estate was a monument to old-world excess, its white pillars glowing under a full moon. The grounds were overflowing with the supernatural elite. Hundreds of them, all ancient, all beautiful, all wearing exquisite masks. The air was thick, with the scent of their power, that ancient, dusty, vampiric smell that Naruto was beginning to loathe. He stood in the grand, 3-story ballroom, a glass of untouched champagne in his hand. He wore a simple, perfectly tailored black suit. No tie, the top button of his white shirt undone. He wore no mask. It was, in itself, the ultimate statement. I have nothing to hide. You are all hiding from me. Rebekah was a vision at his side. She was poured into a blood-red gown that left her back bare, her hair swept up, and a delicate, silver filigree mask covering her eyes. She was, he had to admit, the most beautiful creature he had ever seen. She was also vibrating with tension. Stop that, he murmured, his voice too low for anyone else to hear. Stop what? She hissed, smiling politely at AP. Assing vampire who looked like a Baroque painting. You're nervous. You keep scanning the room for Klaus, like a mouse listening for the hawk. I am not, she said, offended. I am, politically astute. This is a snake pit. And you just waltzed in and announced you're the mongoose. Good. Snakes are easy. Their entrance had been exactly what Elijah had predicted and Klaus had feared. The music, a live classical orchestra, had not just dipped, it had stuttered. Every single head, painted, masked, ancient, and predatory, had turned to watch them. They saw Rebekah Mikaelson, the original sister, defiant and radiant. And they saw the man at her side, the unmasked stranger, the associate, the rumor. Klaus and Elijah were already there, on a balcony overlooking the ballroom, playing their parts. Elijah, the noble diplomat, accepting greetings. Klaus, the dark king, brooding over his domain, his eyes a toxic, furious green as he watched his sister, walk in on the arm of his new, personal nightmare. A man was approaching them. He was tall, dark-haired, and moved with a grace that made even the other vampires look clumsy. He wore a simple, elegant mask of black domino. Lady Rebekah, he said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone. He took her hand and kissed it, his eyes never leaving hers. It has been far, far too long. You are, as ever, a vision. Tristan, Rebekah said, her voice brittle, pulling her hand back. You've aged well. Oh, wait, you haven't. Tristan de Martel smiled, unbothered. His eyes slid to Naruto. He held out his hand. And you must be the associate. I am Tristan de Martel, your host. Naruto looked at the offered hand, then at Tristan smiling, assessing eyes. He didn't take it. Naruto Uzumaki, he said. I'm the date. Tristan's smile widened. He was all charm, all polish, but his eyes were cold, ancient, and endlessly intelligent. Of course, a man of many talents, I'm sure. The city is buzzing with tales of your arrival. I'm not much of a talker. Naruto said. A pity. I find conversation to be the true spice of our long, long lives. He turned back to Rebekah. You must excuse me, so many guests, so little time. He gave her a small, courtly bow. But, a word of advice, old friend. Be careful where you place your loyalties. The world is restless. The ground itself is shifting. The Mikaelsons, for all their power, have always been a symptom of the disease, not the cure. He gave Naruto one last, lingering, analytical look. Enjoy the party. Tristan melted back into the crowd. Charming, Naruto muttered. He's the worst of them. Rebekah said, her smile frozen. He's Elijah's first sire. He thinks he's the civilized one, the true heir. He hates us. He hates Klaus most of all. He's afraid, Naruto said. All of you are. This whole party, it's just a bunch of predators sniffing each other, trying to figure out who's going to get eaten first. Rebekah looked at him, her mask not quite hiding the surprise in her eyes. And you, are you afraid? I'm bored, he said. He put his champagne glass down on a passing tray. You want to really piss them all off. What? He held out his hand. Dance with me. She stared at his hand. This was more than a date. This was a statement. This was her, in front of the entire, ancient vampire society, publicly aligning hers. Elf with the one thing her brother truly feared. It was a betrayal. It was liberating. She placed her hand in his. I thought you didn't know how. I'm a fast learner, he said. He led her onto the floor. The song was a slow, elegant waltz. He placed one hand on the bare skin of her lower back, and she suppressed a shiver. His hand was warm, not the cold, dead marble feel of her own kind. Warm, alive. As they began to move, she realized, with a jolt, that he wasn't lying. He was a natural. His balance was perfect, his movements fluid and confident. He wasn't just dancing. He was leading her, guiding her with a quiet, unshakable confidence. They were the center of the universe. Every eye was on them. You're doing this just to provoke him, aren't you? She murmured, nodding her head toward the balcony where Klaus was watching, his grip on the railing so tight his knuckles were white. No, Naruto said, his blue eyes locked on hers. I'm doing this because I'm at a party with a beautiful woman, and I wanted to dance. His honesty was so blunt, so unexpected, that it disarmed her completely. She was 1,000 years old. She'd been courted, flattered, and lied to by kings, poets, and monsters. But no one had ever been simple with her. They're watching, you know, she said, her voice softer. All of them. They're trying to figure you out. Let them. They're trying to decide if you're a weapon or a target. He spun her, a slow, graceful turn, and pulled her back, just a fraction closer. Why not both? Their faces were inches apart. She could feel the warmth of his breath. She could see the strange, golden flecks in his blue eyes. The music, the crowd, the danger, it all faded away. There was just this connection, this heat. The waltz ended. They stood there for a beat. The spell unbroken. I need a drink, she said, her voice suddenly husky. She pulled away, fanning herself. A real one. Wait here. She turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving him alone in the center of the ballroom. He was alone for less than 10 seconds. Naruto Uzumaki. It was Tristan. He had returned, this time with 2 glasses of scotch. He offered one to Naruto. Naruto took it. He still hadn't taken a drink all night. A bold move, Tristan said, gesturing to the dance floor. Claiming the sister. Does the brother know you're rifling through his toy box? She's not a toy, Naruto said, his voice flat. And she's not his. No, Tristan smiled. Of course not. She is her own, fiery, magnificent, and tragically broken person. I've known her for 900 years. She burns for normalcy, for a choice, but she will always choose him. She will always choose that monstrous, paranoid brother of hers. Always and forever. It is the great, defining tragedy of her life. You talk a lot, Naruto said, swirling the glass. Tristan laughed. As I said, it's my passion. And my passion, right now, is you. You are an impossibility. A creature of pure, natural life. Fused with the curse of the undead. You are the ultimate paradox. And you can do what no one else can. You can end them. Naruto's eyes flicked to Tristan. And you want to watch. Watch. Tristan's smile was sharp. My dear boy, I want to help. You've seen the Mikaelsons. You've been their guest. You've seen the chaos. The endless, childish, bloody squabbling. They are a disease. An imbalance. They hold the world hostage to their family drama. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial purr. The Strix. We are order. We are stability. We are 1,000 years of civilization. Held back by one dysfunctional family. Your power, you are the fulcrum. You are the force that could finally, bring true balance to our world. He raised his glass. We offer you an alliance. A place at the head of the table. Not as a pet, not as an associate, but as a king. Help us remove the tumors, and we will build a true, lasting empire. Together. It was the offer. The temptation. Power. Respect. A kingdom. Naruto looked at the scotch, then back at Tristan. He gave a small, humorless laugh. I'm not a joiner, he said. You say that now, as a curiosity. Tristan said, his smile not faltering. But soon, when Klaus decides your truce is inconvenient, when Elijah decides you're a threat to his, always and forever, you will need allies. We are the only allies worth having. I said it yesterday. I'll say it tomorrow, Naruto said, his voice hard. I don't want your table. I don't want your order. And I really don't like being called a fulcrum. I just want to be left alone. He shoved the untouched glass of scotch back into Tristan's chest. Tristan's smile finally faltered. His eyes went cold. A pity. Such a magnificent, terrible power. Wasted. Without purpose. Power like yours becomes a liability. He sipped his own scotch. And liabilities, Mr. Uzumaki, must be managed. Tristan turned and walked away, disappearing into the sea of masks. Naruto stood there, the weight of the threat settling on him. He felt the air of the ballroom, thick with perfume and secrets, pressing in. He needed air. He turned and headed for a set of tall, French doors that led out onto a moonlit garden. The garden was a maze of high hedges, marble statues, and the scent of night-blooming jasmine. It was quiet, the music from the ball a faint, thrumming pulse in the distance. He knew he was being followed. He'd known it before he even left the ballroom. He stopped in a small, circular clearing, centered on a dry, stone fountain. You can come out. Hiding in the bushes is for kids. He didn't turn around. There was a whoosh of air. Then another, and another. 6 figures dropped from the hedges and the balconies, landing silently on the grass, forming a perfect circle around him. They were not the rabble from the alley. These were the elite. They wore identical black, tactical-looking suits under their formal jackets. And their masks were hard, blank, porcelain. This was the Strix's inner circle. Their Praetorian Guard. A woman stepped forward. She was beautiful, with dark, hair and an even more severe expression. Aya, Tristan's most loyal. Tristan de Martel is disappointed, she said, her voice clipped, devoid of emotion. He offered you a seat at the table. You spat on it. I'm not good at dinner parties, Naruto said, cracking his neck. You are a threat, Aya stated. An unknown. You are a walking, talking weapon of mass destruction. And you are, at this moment, loyal to the single most unstable family on the planet. This cannot be allowed. So you're going to, what? Manage me. We are going to contain you, she said. And they moved. It was not a brawl. It was a professional, coordinated, strategic takedown. 2 of them threw small, obsidian spheres at his feet. They shattered, releasing a cloud of black, shimmering powder. Naruto leapt back, but the powder touched his boots. It burned, not with fire, but with a cold, magical energy. It smelled like decay. He landed, and 2 more were on him. They didn't punch. They were wielding chains, thin as spider silk, but glowing with a faint, sickly purple light. Which forged. He ducked one, but the other wrapped around his arm. He felt it instantly. A drain. The magic in the chain wasn't just holding him. It was siphoning his energy. His healing factor, his supernatural strength, it was all being muted. He roared and tried to pull, but the chain held. A third vampire blurred in, not attacking, but wrapping another chain around his legs, bringing him to one knee. This is not a fight, Aya said, watching from the edge of the clearing. This is a harvest. Naruto was on one knee, his muscles straining against the magical, draining chains. This was what Tristan meant. They were prepared. They had studied him. A 4th and 5th vampire lunged, their hands not claws, but holding short, black, obsidian daggers. Naruto's eyes flashed red. He was not going to be caged. He let his own power flare, not his chakra, but his vampiric strength, and he surged, snapping one of the chains. He punched the ground, the stone of the fountain's edge shattering, sending shrapnel everywhere. He used the moment to get to his feet, ripping the second chain from his leg, the magical metal burning his hands. He was on the defensive. These were warriors. They moved with a 900-year-old synergy. He was faster. He was stronger. But they were 6. And they were smart. He took one down, A brutal side kick to the chest that caved in its ribs, but as he did, another one got behind him, managing to stab one of the obsidian daggers deep into his back, just below the shoulder blade. Naruto roared. It wasn't just pain. The dagger, like the chains, was poison. It wasn't killing him, it was numbing him. His connection to his own power, his chakra, it was being severed. He staggered, ripping the dagger out and throwing it. Aya stepped forward, a faint, satisfied smile on her face. She held a different dagger. It was not obsidian, it was silver, with a familiar, rune-etched hilt. Witch forged, she said. Made with the blood of 1,000 dead witches, bound by a spell of stasis. It won't kill you, it will just put you to sleep. Indefinitely. You are too dangerous to be allowed to roam. And too arrogant to be an ally. She blurred forward, aiming the dagger at his heart. He was too slow. The poison, the drain, he couldn't stop her. Get your filthy hands off him. The scream was pure, unadulterated Rebekah. She hit the clearing like a blonde hurricane. She wasn't an assassin. She was a berserker. She had ripped the leg off a marble bench, and she swung it like a baseball bat, decapitating one of the porcelain-masked vampires. The head flew past Naruto's face. Aya, forced to abort her lunge, hissed in annoyance and turned to face Rebekah. Rebekah, you would betray your own sire line. For this, you would choose him, over us. Rebekah was panting, her red dress torn, her mask gone. Her eyes were blazing with a fire that matched Naruto's. She had had her moment. Standing at the garden door, she'd seen it. She'd seen them catch him. She'd seen him stagger. And in that split second, she had a choice. She could walk away. She could let them take this problem off her family's hands. Klaus would be overjoyed. Elijah would be relieved. Her life could go back to normal. But then she saw the look in his eyes. The same, defiant, cornered animal. Lonely rage she'd felt her entire life. And normal could go to hell. He's with me, she roared, and she charged Aya. The distraction was all Naruto needed. The second Aya's attention was divided, he moved. The poison was still in him, but his rage was stronger. He let his power flare. A faint, golden, shimmering aura, like a heat haze, erupted from his body. It wasn't a cloak, it wasn't a monster. It was just him. Pure, compressed life. The magical chains still on the ground sizzled and melted. The numbing poison from the dagger was burned out of his system in a single, agonizing, cleansing pulse. He was free. Aya, who had just parried a strike from Rebekah, saw it. Her eyes widened in genuine terror. Impossible. Naruto was a golden blue blur. He stood back to back with Rebekah. You took your time, he panted. His voice a low growl. I had to find a decent weapon, she shot back, brandishing the table leg. There were 4 left. The 4 Strix warriors looked at each other, then at the 2 figures. The original sister, and the golden, glowing, thing. They attacked as one, and it was a fight. Left, Naruto yelled. Rebekah swung her marble club, taking a vampire in the chest. The sound of 1,000-year-old sternum cracking like gunfire. Behind you, she screamed. Naruto spun, his hand wreathed in a faint, invisible blade of wind. It wasn't a jutsu. It was just pure, shape-controlled chakra. He didn't cut, he blasted. The vampire that had been lunging at her was hit by a concussive force that sent him flying backward, crashing through the stone fountain. Hitch collapsed in a spray of water and rock. Aya, seeing her elite guard dismantled, made her choice. She lunged, not at Naruto, but at Rebekah, the silver dagger in hand. Naruto moved. He was faster than her. He didn't block. He intercepted. He grabbed her wrist, his grip so tight she cried out, the bones grinding together. The silver dagger fell, clattering on the stones. He spun her around, his other hand coming up to her throat. It's over, he hissed, his eyes still blazing with that golden red light. Aya stared at him, not with fear, but with a cold, soldier's calculation. This isn't over. This is just the beginning. With a sudden, violent twist, she snapped her own neck. Naruto, stunned, was left holding her limp, dead for now body. He let it drop to the ground. The last remaining Strix vampire, seeing his leader fall, did the only sane thing. He versus sped, disappearing into the night. The garden was a wreck. Statues were broken. The fountain was a pile of rubble. 2 headless, and 1 smashed. Strix's vampires lay dead on the grass. Aya's body was a promise of future vengeance. Naruto and Rebekah were alone. Panting. Adrenaline pounding through them like a drug. He was covered in grime and glowing faintly. She was covered in blood, her dress in ruins, her hair wild. They stared at each other. You, he breathed. You, she said, her voice trembling. You were amazing, he said. The adrenaline making him honest. You were glowing, she said, a half-hysterical laugh bubbling in her throat. They were high on the fight, high on the victory, high on each other. The air between them was so thick, so electric, he could taste it. He took a step toward her. She took a step toward him. How touching. The voice was pure ice. They both froze. Klaus was standing in the shattered garden doorway, flanked by Elijah. His face was not the mask of rage from the ballroom. It was a mask of pure, cold, murderous fury. He had seen it all. The Strix's insult. And now, this. His sister, fighting, bleeding, dying, for him. The Strix had been a political problem. This was a betrayal. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Devil in the Bayou. The walk back to the abattoir was a silent, thrumming wire of tension. The 4 of them, Naruto, Rebekah, and the 2 brothers who had met them in the ruined garden, moved through the pre-dawn streets the French Quarter like a royal funeral procession. Aya's body was gone. The Strix had retrieved their dead with supernatural speed, a silent, efficient cleanup that was more threatening than any declaration of war. They entered the courtyard. The air was cool, the sky a deep, bruised purple that promised a new day. But the atmosphere inside the compound was heavy, thick with the smell of ozone and the silent, vibrating rage of Klaus Mikaelson. He stood in the center of the courtyard, not pacing, not drinking, not painting. He was just still. And it was the most terrifying stillness Rebekah had ever seen. Elijah, ever the diplomat, stepped forward, his suit impeccably clean, as if he hadn't just been standing in a garden of corpses. Well, that was regrettable. Klaus's voice was soft, dangerously soft. He turned his head, his gaze falling not on Naruto, but on his sister. Regrettable, brother. Regrettable is spilling wine. Regrettable is a poor choice in theatrical partners. That, he gestured to Rebekah, her red dress torn, her hair matted with blood and dirt, the marble bench leg still clutched in her hand. Was a betrayal. I was attacked, Nick. Rebekah threw the chunk of marble to the stone floor, where it landed with a crack. They were trying to kill me. After they failed to kill him. And you, Klaus said, his voice dropping to a whisper, bled for him. The accusation hung in the air, simple, final, and absolute. They used witch-forged daggers. She shot back, her adrenaline-fueled defiance still burning. They had chains. They were prepared. What was I supposed to do? Let them take him. Let them stick me with that thing Aya was holding. Yes, Klaus roared, his cold mask shattering, revealing the incandescent, paranoid fury beneath. Yes, you were. He is the problem, Rebekah. He is the sickness. And for one glorious, shining moment, the entire Strix organization was offering us the cure. They were doing our dirty work for us. And you stupid, sentimental fool, you picked him. Rebekah flinched, the words striking her harder than any physical blow. She had chosen a stranger over her family. And in Klaus's world, that was the only sin that mattered. Niklas, be silent. It was Elijah. His voice was not a request. It was a command, as cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. Klaus, in the full flight of his rage, actually faltered. Turning to his brother in disbelief. Elijah was not looking at him. His dark, intelligent eyes were fixed on Naruto. He was processing. The politician, the strategist, was recalibrating 1,000 years of strategic thought in a single instant. Klaus, for once in your miserable, impulsive life, stop thinking like a wounded child and think like a king, Elijah said, his voice dripping with contempt. What did we just witness? He didn't wait for an answer. Tristan de Martel, the arrogant, conniving leader of the most powerful and ancient vampire society on this planet, just declared a covert war on this family. He brought his finest, his Praetorian Guard, He used witch-forged weapons, siphoning chains, and dark objects of unimaginable power, and he failed. He took a step toward Naruto. They failed. Aya, his most loyal, is dead. His entire honor guard is a smear on the grass. Tristan has not just lost a fight. He has lost face. He has lost everything. He came to test the rumor. And the rumor blew his house down. Elijah's gaze was electric. This man, he said, nodding to Naruto, is not a liability. He is not a problem. He is a deterrent. He is the single greatest thermonuclear weapon in the history of our species, and he is sitting in our living room. Naruto, who had been quietly watching this family drama unfold, finally spoke. I'm not your weapon. All three siblings turned to him. The golden glow from the fight had faded, but the presence of that power remained. He was no longer the associate. He was no longer the date. He was the center of gravity. The Strix attacked me, Naruto said, his voice flat. I finished it. Your truce means you stay out of my way. It also means I stay out of yours. But they, he nodded in the direction of the garden, made themselves my business. If you want to be next, we can do that. Or, we can be done. He was restating the terms. But they were no longer a negotiation. They were a fact. Klaus looked at him, his face a mask of warring emotions. The humiliation of his defeat, the fury at his sister's betrayal, and the cold, dawning realization that Elijah was right. He was, for the first time in his life, truly, completely, and utterly, outmaneuvered. He was trapped. He couldn't kill Naruto. He couldn't control Naruto. And now, he couldn't even allow anyone else to kill Naruto, because this thing was, paradoxically, the only thing keeping the rest of the world from descending on them to claim the weapon for themselves. He was in checkmate. Klaus Mikaelson looked at his sister's defiant, blood-streaked face. He looked at his brother's cold, calculating one. And he looked at the golden-haired interloper who had brought his entire world to a grinding halt. He said nothing. He just turned, his shoulders rigid, and stalked from the courtyard, the promise of a long, cold, and terrible war radiating from his very silence. The tension broke. Rebekah let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Her knees suddenly weak. Elijah smoothed his jacket, his mask of perfect composure sliding back into place. Well, now that that's settled, I have a city to manage. The Strix will be uncharacteristically silent. I must be the first to speak. He nodded to Naruto, a new, cold respect in his eyes. You have simplified my political landscape. I am in your debt. He, too, walked away, leaving Naruto and Rebekah alone in the dawn light. The courtyard was silent, save for the distant sound of the city waking up. Rebekah stared at the ground, at the marble cudgel she had dropped. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only a hollow, aching exhaustion and the sting of Klaus's words. You bled for him. He's right, you know, she whispered, her voice rough. He'll never forgive me for that. For choosing you. Naruto looked at her, her ruined dress, her wild hair, the dried blood on her cheek. He'd never seen anything more magnificent. Why did you? Rebekah looked up, her eyes, puffy from adrenaline and the threat of tears, meeting his. Because, I've spent 1,000 years watching my brothers murder, and manipulate, and control everyone who ever looked at me. Because, for one bloody, stupid second, I was tired of letting them. I was tired of being the bait. I was tired of being the prize. She took a shaky step toward him. And because they were hurting you, and I just really wanted to hit something. A small, genuine smile, the first one he'd given her, touched his lips. You were swinging a table leg. A marble table leg, she corrected, a half-hysterical laugh bubbling in her throat. Very high-end. He was close now, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin. That impossible, living warmth. You were glowing, she said, her voice dropping. You were amazing, he replied, his voice just as low. The air was electric. The fight, the blood, the victory, the shared, defiant, us, against, them. It all coalesced into a single, undeniable point of gravity. He reached out, his thumb brushing the dried blood on her cheek. She didn't flinch. She didn't move. She just leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut, and in that moment, In the courtyard of her family's fortress, a place of so much of her pain, Rebekah Mikaelson felt, for the first time, not safe, but seen. A day passed. A day of suffocating, false peace. The abattoir was silent. Klaus was locked in his studio, painting something furious and dark. Elijah was in endless, hushed meetings, managing the Strix's silent retreat. Rebekah avoided them both, and by extension, she avoided Naruto, confused and terrified by the raw, undeniable thing that had sparked between them in the courtyard. Naruto sat on the edge of the fountain, meditating, but his mind was not at peace. The city was holding its breath. He had broken the ecosystem, and he could feel the other predators, the ones who didn't live in the abattoir, beginning to stir. The air in the quarter was thick with the scent of ozone and something else. Fear. A collective, spiritual fear. It was in the bayou that the fear finally found its voice. The Crescent Wolf Pack had felt the shift. They had felt the wave of unnatural, cleansing power that had incinerated the vampire Thierry. They had heard the whispers of a new king in the quarter. And they were afraid, but their fear was nothing compared to that of the ancestors. The witches of the French Quarter were not their own masters. They were vessels, puppets for the long dead, long-raging spirits of their bloodlines. And the ancestors were furious. The originals were an abomination. A perversion of nature, a spell that had torn a hole in the fabric of the world. But this new thing, this golden wolf, he was something worse. He was an impossibility. He was a being of pure, divine life fused with the undeath of the vampire curse. He was a walking, talking paradox that threatened to unravel everything. They saw him not as a savior, but as the final symptom of the disease. And they decided, with their collective, spectral will, to force his hand. In a shack deep in the swamp, Jackson Kenner, the alpha of the Crescent Pack, doubled over, a scream ripping from his throat. His bones were breaking. He collapsed, his body convulsing, his limbs twisting at unnatural angles. But it wasn't the full moon. And it wasn't just him. Across the encampment, one by one, the wolves began to scream. Their healing factors, their greatest gift, reversed. Small cuts began to bleed profusely. Old scars tore open. Their own supernatural resilience was eating them alive. It was agony. It was a curse of unimaginable cruelty. Haley Marshall, the hybrid mother of Klaus's child, was at the abattoir when she felt it. A psychic echo of her pack's agony, a bond of shared pain. She burst into the courtyard, her face a mask of pale terror. She found Elijah, Klaus, and Freya, who had been drawn by her panicked arrival. "My pack," she gasped, her hands shaking. They're dying. The witches, it's the ancestors, they've laid a curse on them." Klaus, who was standing by the staircase, just snorted. "And your mangy family is not my concern. I am dealing with a domestic infestation that requires my full attention." His eyes flickered to the fountain, where Naruto sat, watching, his meditation broken. "Elijah," Haley pleaded, turning to him. Elijah winced, his face a mask of genuine regret. "Haley, my hands are tied. The Strix are poised on a knife's edge. Tristan is looking for any excuse, any sign of weakness. I will not, provoke an open war with the witches so soon after this." "So you're just going to let them die?" she shrieked, her wolf's protective rage flaring. "I cannot fight a war on two fronts," Elijah said, and his tone was final. "Freya," Haley begged, turning to the last sibling. Freya shook her head, her face pale. I can feel it. The magic. It's sacrificial. It's not just a curse, Haley. The ancestors are feeding on them. They've created a nexus to drain their life force. It's too old. Too strong. I can't break it. I'm sorry." Haley staggered back, the betrayal stinging her more than the psychic pain. "So that's it. You're all just useless." She stormed out of the courtyard, tears of rage and desperation streaming down her face. She made it to the street, her mind racing, trying to think. How? Haley. She spun. Rebekah was standing in the archway, her face grim. She had watched the whole pathetic exchange. She had seen her brothers, the two most powerful beings on Earth, reduced to cowards by politics and paranoia. "What do you want?" Haley spat. "Come to offer more empty apologies?" "No," Rebekah said, her voice low. My brothers are occupied. They're fools. But there might be someone else. Haley's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Rebekah took a deep breath. This was it. This was more than just defying Klaus for a dance. This was giving away the family's greatest, most dangerous secret. This was choosing a side. The new guest, Rebekah said, her voice barely a whisper. The one they're all terrified of. His power, it's not like ours. It's life. He healed Klaus from a bite that was erasing him. He didn't just stop a curse, he cleansed it. Haley's head snapped up. Hope, sharp and painful, pierced her despair. She didn't wait. She didn't ask permission. She stormed back into the courtyard, past a stunned Rebekah, and marched straight up to the man on the fountain. Klaus and Elijah, who were in a low, furious argument, stopped. Haley stood before Naruto. He was just sitting. The eye of their storm. She was blunt. She was desperate. I'm Haley, she said, her voice shaking. My family is in the bayou. They're not your kind of family. They're wolves, and the witches are murdering them with a curse. Right now, they're in agony. Naruto's eyes, which had been distant, sharpened. They focused on her, and for the first time, she felt the weight of his attention. Rebekah says you can stop it, Haley said, her voice breaking. She says you cleanse things. She took a ragged breath. I'm not asking you to fight for them. I'm not asking you to pick a side. I'm begging you, please. They're all I have. Naruto was silent. He looked past Haley, at Klaus's furious, warning glare. He looked at Elijah's pained, complicated expression. Then he looked back at Haley. He saw her, a leader, desperate for her people. He saw the loneliness of her position. He saw her, willing to beg her enemies, to beg a monster, just to save the people she loved. It was the most familiar feeling in the world. This was his Nindo. He stood up. Show me, he said. You are going nowhere. Klaus's voice was a low, guttural growl. The cold politeness was gone. This was a direct order. Naruto turned to face him. Your truce, as I remember it, means I don't interfere with you and your family. It doesn't mean I let you tell me where I can and can't go. Interfering with the witches is interfering with me. Klaus roared, taking a step forward. It destabilizes my city. You will not leave this compound. Or what? Naruto asked. It was a simple question. You'll bite me. You'll fight me. We both know how that ends. These people, he gestured to Haley, are dying. You won't help them. I will. He turned to Haley. Let's go. No. Klaus blurred, appearing in the archway. Blocking their path. I forbid it. Then stop me, Naruto said. The standoff was absolute. Klaus was shaking, his hybrid face beginning to show, his rage so total he was on the verge of doing something suicidal. He's right, Nick. Rebekah stepped out of the shadows. She stood beside Naruto and Haley. You won't help. He will. And this family, has sat by and watched people die for political convenience for 1,000 years. I'm done with it. She looked at Naruto. I'm going with him. The line was drawn. It was Klaus, Elijah, and Freya on one side, and Naruto, Rebekah, and Haley on the other. It was the old world versus the new. Klaus looked at his sister, standing beside the man he hated, defending the wolves he despised. The betrayal was complete. He was shaking. He was cornered. And he was, for the second time, powerless to stop him. Naruto, Rebekah, and Haley just walked past him. They didn't run. They walked right through the archway, leaving Klaus to seethe in the courtyard, his kingdom, and his family, crumbling around him. The bayou was a nightmare. The moment they stepped out of the car, the sound hit them, a collective, unending scream that seemed to come from the trees, the mud, the air itself. This way, Haley said, and she ran, leaping over fallen logs, Rebekah and Naruto right behind her. They burst into the encampment. It was a war zone. Wolves, dozens of them, were on the ground, their bodies contorting, their limbs breaking and re-breaking. Jackson was there, pale and sweating, his own arm bent at a sickening angle. Haley, he gasped. It's in us, it won't stop. The air was black with dark magic. It was so thick, Naruto could see it, a pulsing, green-black miasma that clung to everything. The abomination. A voice, high and shrieking, cut through the din. On a small rise, a coven of witches stood, their hands raised. They were not the young, uncertain harvest girls. These were the masters, their eyes rolled back. Their bodies puppets for the dead. One, a woman in a dark dress, her face a mask of religious fervor, pointed at Naruto. The vessel, the insult, the ancestors demand your end. This was a trap, for you. They wanted me to come, Naruto said, his eyes narrowing. They wanted to slaughter my people to get your attention. Haley roared, her hybrid face emerging. The ancestors demand their souls. The oracle screamed, and yours. The coven attacked. They threw their hands forward, and the dark, miasmic magic coalesced, forming bolts of pure, necrotic energy. Get down, Rebekah yelled, tackling Haley. Naruto didn't move. The bolts of dark magic hit him, and dissipated. They sizzled against his skin like water on a hot skillet. His own innate life force, his chakra, was a natural counter to their death-based magic. The witches stared, their chant faltering. He's immune. Not immune, Naruto said, his voice a low growl. Just better. This was not a job for a scalpel. This was a job for a cannon. He blurred forward, appearing in the center of the clearing. You want to play with energy. He held out his right hand, palm up. His chakra, his pure, blue energy, began to swirl. It spun, faster and faster, a sound like 1,000 angry hornets filling the air. It was a perfect, contained, swirling sphere of pure, concentrated life. A Rasengan. The witches had never seen anything like it. It was not magic. It was something else. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying. He makes it. The oracle whispered, in awe and horror. The vessel must be destroyed. Now, she shrieked. They poured all their power into one combined assault. The ground tore open. Vines and roots, thick as a man's arm and black with necrotic energy, erupted from the earth. Lashing out, trying to ensnare him. Rebekah and Haley were back up. We'll take the vines, Haley yelled. They became a blur of hybrid and original strength, tearing the animated. Attacking plants to pieces, protecting the dying wolves. Naruto ignored the vines. He walked, his hand held high, the swirling, screaming sphere of blue light his only weapon. He walked straight toward the oracle. Be gone, she screamed, and she and her coven unleashed a final, massive wave of pure, dark power. Naruto met it. He didn't push back. He just advanced. His Rasengan, his pure, life force, hit the wave of death force. It was not a contest. The dark magic was obliterated. It was cleansed, purified, and erased in a blinding flash of blue-white light. The shockwave of pure, natural energy erupted outward, shattering the witches' spells. The coven was thrown back like dolls, their connection to the ancestors severed, their bodies broken. But the screaming from the wolves, didn't stop. It's not working, Haley cried, looking at Jackson, who was still convulsing. The curse, it's still feeding. It's not them, Naruto panted, his Rasengan fading. He closed his eyes, his senses flaring, pushing past the witches, past the wolves. It's there. He pointed to the center of the encampment. An ancient, gnarled tree, dead for a century, was pulsing with a faint, sickening, green-black light. Jammed into its heart was a totem. A thing of bone, and black feathers, and blood-soaked vines. It was the nexus, the focal point for the curse. It's feeding on them, he said. I can't heal all of them one by one. He walked toward the totem. The closer he got, the more violent the dark magic became, the air itself screaming at him, trying to push him back. Then break it, Rebekah yelled, standing guard, her eyes scanning the dark swamp for more threats. I will, Naruto said. He placed his hand on the totem. The moment he touched it, a scream of 1,000 dead witches erupted from it. The dark magic attacked him, flooding his system, trying to drain him as it had the wolves. It felt like being plunged into a river of ice and decay. You are ours, vessel. The voices shrieked in his mind. We will unmake you. We will feed. The cold spread up his arm, his skin turning black, his veins standing out. Naruto, Rebekah screamed, seeing it happen, a sudden, sharp fear for him, piercing her. He was on one knee, his teeth gritted, his arm being consumed. You want to feed, he thought, a snarl twisting his lips. Then choke on it. He didn't just push back. He unleashed. He let his chakra flare. The golden, shimmering aura that she had seen in the garden, but 1,000 times stronger. It exploded from him, a pillar of pure, golden light that lit up the bayou like a new sun. Be gone, he roared, his voice a divine command. He flooded the dark object, the nexus, the very conduit to the ancestors, with his own, pure, indomitable life force. The totem, the ancient tree, the dark magic itself, it couldn't contain it. The death magic was incinerated. The decay was purified. The hate was overridden. There was a sound like a god's heartbeat stopping. And the totem exploded. It didn't just break. It vaporized in a shockwave of pure, golden light that washed over the entire encampment, over the entire bayou. Silence. The green-black miasma was gone. The screaming had stopped. Across the clearing, the wolves lay panting, weak, their limbs still broken. Haley rushed to Jackson. Jackson. Oh God. Jackson coughed, a weak, rattling sound. And then, pop, his arm, bent at a sickening angle, snapped back into place. His healing factor, no longer reversed, kicked in. The color flooded his face. He gasped, his eyes flying open. It was happening everywhere. The wolves, one by one, were healing. The curse was broken. It was cleansed. Haley was sobbing, holding Jackson's hand. He looked at her, then, at the man in the center of the clearing. Naruto stood, breathing heavily, the last of his golden aura fading. He was covered in sweat, but he was victorious. Haley met his gaze. The look in her eyes, it wasn't just gratitude. It was something deeper. It was fealty. The entire Crescent Pack, now sitting up, weak but alive, was staring at him. Their savior. Their golden wolf. Rebekah was just staring. He hadn't just won a fight. He hadn't just saved her. He had saved them. He was a hero. A real, tangible, terrifying, and beautiful hero. This was the man she'd read about in old world romances. The kind of man she'd stopped believing could even exist. And in the French Quarter, in the Lafayette Cemetery, the Oracle, who had crawled back, screamed. She and every witch, connected to the ancestors, fell to their knees as the connection was not just severed, but burned. The ancestors were furious. They had, for the first time, been truly, utterly beaten. They had not just lost. They had been purified, and they would never, ever forgive it. Back at the abattoir, Klaus stood on the balcony, a glass of scotch in his hand. He had been standing there for an hour, just listening. He had felt it. The entire city had. A wave of power, so pure and so overwhelming, that it had dwarfed even his own. He felt the rage of the witches. He felt the sudden, shocking, gratitude of the wolves. He knew, with a chilling, absolute certainty, what it meant. The man who had stolen his sister, the man who had humiliated him, the man he could not kill, had just gained an army. The board had changed, irrevocably. And he was no longer the king. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. Echoes in the Dark. The morning after the bayou was not a morning of celebration. It was a funeral. The abattoir, which had been a pressure cooker for a week, was now a live bomb. The silence was the most terrifying part. It was a thick, volatile, sulfur-smelling silence, pregnant with the promise of an explosion. Naruto sat on the edge of the fountain, his eyes closed, attempting to meditate, but it was useless. The air was too thick, not with magic, but with pure, uncut human and inhuman emotion. Haley Marshall was there. She had not left his side, a silent, grim-faced sentinel posted near the staircase, her arms crossed, her eyes locked on Klaus. She was a hybrid, a mother, an alpha, and she-ha. Dee just pledged her entire pack to the man sitting on the fountain. She was his first, and most loyal, soldier. Klaus was in the center of the courtyard, drinking. It wasn't the slow, charming sip of a connoisseur. It was 8 a.m. And he was downing tumblers of scotch like a man trying to extinguish a fire, his eyes, dark and flat, fixed on the new, unofficial alliance between his daughter's mother and Dee, the creature he loathed more than his own father. Elijah was gone. He had left before sunrise, his face a mask of cold fury. He was not managing a political situation, he was engaged in damage control on a global scale. The Strix were a problem. The witches, however, were an apocalypse. Naruto hadn't just severed their connection, he'd purified their nexus, a move they considered the ultimate violation, a spiritual assault. They were, as one, demanding blood. And then, there was Rebekah. She stood on the second-floor balcony, leaning against the wrought iron rail, watching the three of them. Haley, the loyal wolf. Her brother, the broken tyrant. And Naruto, the quiet, impossible eye of her entire, world-ending storm. She had spent the night in her room, not sleeping, just thinking. She had replayed the fight. His golden aura, the way he had cleansed the curse. The look of awe on Haley's face. The heroism. Then she replayed Klaus's words. Betrayal. She looked at her brother now, at the way he was gripping his glass. His knuckles white. She knew that look. It was the look he'd had just before he'd daggered her in Chicago in 22. The look he'd had when he'd murdered her beloved Alexander in the 12th century. It was not the look of a petulant child. It was the look of a man who had decided that the thing he loved was irreparably broken, and it was time to put it back in its box. He was planning. He was plotting. He knew he couldn't beat Naruto in a fight. So he would do what he always did. He would go through her. He would dagger her to punish them both. To remove the distraction. And as she looked at Naruto, so calm, so centered, she felt a sudden, sharp, protective rage that had nothing to do with family loyalty. She was done. She was done being a pawn. She was done being a prize. And she was done being a victim. She turned from the balcony and walked, her steps purposeful. A moment later, her heels clicked on the stone floor of the courtyard. Klaus didn't look up, but his drinking hand paused. Haley tensed, her weight shifting. Rebekah walked past them both, straight to Naruto. He opened his eyes as her shadow fell over him. Get up, she said. Her voice wasn't a request. It was a command. What? Get up. We're leaving. She had a set of car keys in her hand, the ones to Klaus's black Bentley convertible. Naruto's head tilted. Leaving where? Anywhere. Everywhere. This. She gestured to the oppressive, silent courtyard, to her brother, to the very stones, is a cage. And I'm not going to be in it when he finally decides to set it on fire. Rebekah, what are you doing? Klaus's voice was a low growl. She didn't even look at him. Her eyes were locked on Naruto's. He's going to dagger me. I can see it in his eyes. He's just waiting for you to turn your back. And when he does, I know what you'll do. She glanced at Klaus, her expression flat. You'll tear him apart. You'll unmake him. And as much as I hate him right now, I'm not going to be the reason my family gets erased. She held out her hand. The keys dangled. So, we're leaving. You, me, now. Getaway. Let's call it. Before I end up in a box and you end up a kinslayer. Haley's eyes widened. She looked from Rebekah to Klaus. This was it. The final, open act of defiance. Naruto looked at her hand. At the keys. At the desperate, fiery, reckless honesty in her eyes. She wasn't running from her brother. She was trying to save him. And herself. And, in a strange way, him. He stood up. He took the keys. All right, he said. You will not. Klaus was on his feet, the glass shattering in his grip. You are not taking my car. You are not taking my sister. She's not yours, Klaus, Naruto said, his voice quiet. He started walking toward the archway. I will end you, Klaus roared. You can't, Naruto said, not looking back. And you know it, Rebekah, Klaus screamed, his voice breaking with 1,000 years of possessive, toxic love. Don't you dare walk out that door. If you do, if you choose him, do not come back. Rebekah, who was walking beside Naruto, paused. She stopped just at the edge of the archway. She turned. Her face was pale, her eyes burning bright. I've been your sister for 1,000 years, Nick, she said, her voice trembling, but strong. I have loved you. I have feared you. I have followed you into every single, bloody, self-made hell. And what has it gotten me? A collection of daggers. A graveyard of lovers. A life of your choices. She took a deep, shuddering breath. This one is mine. She turned, and she walked out into the sunlight, leaving Klaus Mikaelson alone in the courtyard with his shattered glass, his new wolfish spy, and the ruins of his family. They drove for hours. Rebekah had directed him north, out of New Orleans. Out of the swamp, out of the oppressive, supernatural thickness of the coast. They drove, the top down, the wind whipping their hair, the sound of the Bentley's engine a low, powerful growl. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. The silence wasn't the volatile, painful silence of the abattoir. It was a wide open, clean, empty silence. It was the sound of escape. She watched him as he drove. He drove like he did everything else, with a relaxed, total, unthinking competence. He wasn't sightseeing. He wasn't anything. He was just being. Turn here, she said, pointing to a small, unmarked dirt road almost hidden by overgrown trees. He took the turn. The road wound for a mile, the branches of old-growth pines forming a tunnel, before opening up onto a massive, clear, sun-drenched lake. At the edge of the lake, almost hidden, was a house. It wasn't a mansion. It was an old, beautiful, two-story cypress and stone lake house, with a wide, wraparound porch and a long, wooden dock that stretched out into the water. "What is this place?" Naruto asked, pulling the car to a stop. "A gift," Rebekah said, her voice quiet, a little sad. "From a friend. In the 1950s. A human. He was old. He left it to me in his will. Klaus never knew about it. It's the one place he's never tainted. It was the one place that was truly hers." They got out. The air was different. It was clean. It smelled of pine, and lake water, and hot stones. The only sound was the buzz of insects and the lapping of the water against the shore. "So," she said, crossing her arms, the tension of the city finally beginning to unknot in her shoulders. "Welcome to nowhere. What does a god-level, curse-breaking, original killing thing do on his day off?" Naruto looked at the vast, sparkling expanse of the lake. A slow, unfamiliar, almost boyish grin spread across his face. "Last one in is a bully," he said. And before she could even process the words, he was hucking his shirt and kicking off his boots. "Hey, that is not." He ran down the dock and, with a running leap, flew, executing a perfect, clean dive into the blue water. He surfaced a moment later, slicking his blonde hair back. His blue eyes bright. "Water's great," he yelled. Rebekah stared. He was a kid. All the power, the pressure, the ancient, weary sadness he carried, it was gone, washed away in that one simple, human act. A laugh, a real, unguarded, giddy laugh, bubbled up in her throat. She hadn't laughed like that in a century. Maybe more. "You're on," she yelled. She kicked off her sandals and, without a second thought, ran and jumped, her own dive a chaotic, glorious splash that soaked him. She surfaced, sputtering and laughing, and he splashed her right in the face. "Oh, you did not," she shrieked. "I did," he laughed, splashing her again. She lunged at him, and for the next hour, they weren't an original vampire and a divine hybrid. They were just a boy and a girl in a lake. Their fight was a chaotic, joyous, childish war of splashing, dunking, and shoving. He was, of course, stronger, but he held back, letting her win half the time, and she was happy. It was a joy so pure and so simple that it ached. The sun began to set. The sky was a painted, impossible canvas of orange, purple, and blood red. They were sitting on the edge of the long, wooden dock. Their legs dangling in the cooling water, wrapped in thick towels they'd found in the house. A comfortable, warm silence had settled between them. "This is nice," Naruto said, his voice low. "It is," she whispered. She was leaning back on her hands, her face tilted up to the last of the sun. "It's quiet. I forget what quiet feels like." They sat like that for a long time. The normalcy of the day had stripped away their armor, leaving them both vulnerable. Rebekah finally broke the silence. She had to know. "Why?" she asked, her voice soft. "The wolves in the bayou. You didn't just help them. You unleashed all of that for them. You made an enemy of every witch in Louisiana, maybe the world. For strangers. Why?" Naruto was quiet for a moment, watching a fish jump in the distance. "It wasn't for strangers," he said. "It was for Haley. She's a leader. She was begging for her family. They were being hunted, tortured, just for being what they were. For being inconvenient. He picked up a small stone from the dock and tossed it, skipping it across the water's surface. 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 skips. I know what that feels like, he said. His voice flat. Rebekah turned her head, her wet hair sticking to her cheek. She looked at his profile, silhouetted against the setting sun. Hated. You. She let out a small, disbelieving laugh. You walk through walls. You glow. You end curses. You make my 1,000-year-old monster of a brother tremble. Who would ever be stupid enough to hate you? The question hung in the air. His smile faded. The boy from the lake was gone, replaced by the ancient, weary man she'd first seen. Everyone, he whispered. My whole life. He looked at her, his blue eyes holding a well of pain so deep she felt like she was falling into it. I was an orphan, he said. From the day I was born. I never knew my parents. And I had something wrong with me. Something inside me. A monster, they all said. Something I couldn't control. Something I didn't ask for. The whole village, he continued, his voice a low, rough rasp, they didn't just ignore me. They hated me. They looked at me like I was dirt. Like I was a plague. Like I was the reason for all their problems. The adults, they'd whisper when I walked by. They'd pull their children away. Their kids. They'd just follow their lead. He was looking at the water, but he was seeing something else. A lonely, orange-clad child on a swing. I spent my entire childhood just screaming. He choked out, the words thick. Doing anything. Pranks, yelling, acting like a fool. Anything, just to get one person, anyone, to just see me. To see me, not the thing they'd all decided I was. He finally turned to her, and she saw, for the first time, not a god, not a weapon, but a profoundly, deeply broken man. So when Haley begged me to save her family, they're all I have. I couldn't not go, because I'm the one who knows exactly what that alone feels like. Rebekah was just staring. Her heart, her cold, dead, 1,000-year-old heart, ached. It was a physical, sharp, impossible pain. She wasn't looking at a monster. She was looking in a mirror. He daggers me, she whispered, the words falling from her lips before she could stop them. Naruto's head snapped up. What? My brother, she said, a single, hot tear tracing a path down her cheek. Nick, whenever I'm happy, whenever I find someone who sees me, he finds a reason. He's a threat. He's not good enough. And he plunges a silver dagger into my heart. Her voice was trembling, but she couldn't stop. It doesn't kill me. It just stops me. I'm awake, in the dark. For decades at a time. Just darkness, and silence, and nothing. Just alone, in a box, waiting. She was sobbing now, the raw, ugly, 1,000-year-old sobs he'd heard in the dungeon. And the worst part, she choked out, the worst part, Naruto, is that when I wake up, after 50 years, after 100, and he pulls that dagger out. And he says he's sorry, and he needs his sister, the worst part, is that I forgive him. Every single time. Because he's my brother. He's all I have. He's my, always and forever. She was looking at him, her face a ruin of a millennium of pain. He saw her, the girl who was hated, the girl who was hunted, the girl who was put in a box, just for being her. He didn't say, it'll be okay. He didn't say, you're strong. He didn't offer a single, empty platitude. He just reached out his hand, his thumb brushing away the tear on her cheek. His touch impossibly, beautifully, warm. You're not alone, Rebekah, he whispered, his voice raw with a shared, perfect understanding. Not anymore. She looked at him. This man, this impossible, powerful, kind, and broken man. He wasn't a hero from a storybook. He was real. And he saw her. She didn't even know who moved first. She leaned in. He leaned in. And their lips met. It was not the fiery, lust-filled kiss of her past. It was not a kiss of passion, or of ownership, or of desperation. It was a kiss of recognition. It was two of the loneliest, most powerful, most broken souls on the planet. Finally, finding a shore. It was gentle. It was hesitant. It was a promise. It was everything. And the instant their lips touched, the world ended. It wasn't a fade to black. It was a shattering. The lake, the dock, the sky, it all vanished. They weren't in Louisiana. They weren't anywhere. They were elsewhere. A place of no color and no sound. A vast, empty consciousness. And it was screaming. It was the scream of a billion trees being felled. The roar of an ocean being boiled. The sound of a planet dying. They were floating, holding hands, in the center of a storm. A storm of pure, green, raging will. It was not a person. It was not a spirit. It was nature. It was the earth itself. The progenitor spirit. And it was showing them a memory. They saw her, Esther, 1,000 years ago. They saw the clearing. They saw the white oak tree, ancient and pure. They saw her, kneeling, calling on the sun and the moon, her hands bloody. They saw her perform the immortality spell. And when she did, they saw the white oak bleed. They saw the spirit, this vast, green thing, recoil. The spell didn't just use nature, it tore it. It created a hole. A rip in the fabric of life and death. The original sin. The memory faded. And the storm, the vast, angry, sentient will of nature, saw them. It focused. They were no longer observers. They were the problem. A voice, not a voice, but a feeling, a pressure, a knowing, filled their minds. It was cold, it was ancient, and it was furious. The wound, it thundered, the voice, echoing in their very bones. It festered. The abominations. They spread the sickness. It was talking about her family. And then, the great, green, raging storm zeroed in on Naruto. It felt his chakra. It felt the pure life. And it hissed. The vessel. It has arrived. The paradox. The pure life. Fused with the sickness. The consciousness pressed in, and there was no kindness. No warmth. Only a cold, divine judgment. The vessel was to cleanse the wound. It was to unmake the sickness. It was the purifying fire. The vision shifted. It showed them, yesterday. It showed them Klaus, dying. The golden light unmaking him. The spirit, approved. And then, it showed them Naruto, dripping his own blood onto the wound. Healing him. But the vessel is weak, the storm roared. The vessel mends the wound. It saves the sickness. It lies with it. Rebekah felt a cold so profound it was like being back in the box. No, the spirit's judgment was final. The vessel has failed. The pure life has been corrupted. The cure has become the disease. The age of magic, the age of abominations, is over. A new, terrifying decree echoed through their minds. All WHO drink from the poison well. All WHO are touched by the sickness. All must be unmade. The world snapped back. Gasp. They were ripped apart, collapsing on the wooden dock, shivering, freezing, soaked in a cold sweat that had nothing to do with the lake. The romantic, warm sunset was gone, replaced by a cold, dark, star-filled night. The spell was broken. The connection was shattered. Rebekah was trembling, her arms wrapped around herself. What in the hell was that? Naruto was on his hands and knees, breathing heavily, his mind reeling. He had felt that kind of presence before. That cold, absolute, otherworldly power. A power that saw humans as nothing more than ants. He looked up, his eyes dark with a new, dawning, absolute terror. The real enemy wasn't Klaus. It wasn't the Strix. It wasn't even the ancestors. That, he said, his voice a grim, raw whisper, was the thing the witches were praying to. That was God. And I think we just officially declared war on it. Chapter 6 End.